Hey, welcome back. Or maybe this is your first time here. Either way, if you're listening to this, sleep hasn't shown up yet. So let me help. I'll read you 5 soft stories tonight, slow enough to ease you into the quiet, steady enough to rest your thoughts. The rain will fill in the gaps. Story 1. Someone left Polaroids of my windows on my porch. The first Polaroid showed my kitchen window. I found it on my welcome mat on a Tuesday morning, face up, slightly damp from the overnight rain. The image was unmistakable: the window above my sink, the herbs I keep on the sill, the yellow curtains my ex had picked out and I'd never bothered to replace, taken from outside, from somewhere in my backyard, at an angle that suggested the photographer had been standing near the fence line. The photo was recent. I could tell because the basil plant on the left was wilting. I'd forgotten to water it for a few days, and it had only started drooping over the weekend. Whoever took this picture had been in my yard within the last 48 hours. I stood on my porch in my bathrobe, coffee growing cold in my hand, and tried to make it make sense. I'm 34 years old. I work as a technical writer, mostly from home, in a quiet suburb where the biggest crime is usually teenagers stealing lawn ornaments. I've lived in this house for almost 3 years, bought it after my divorce, when I needed somewhere that felt like mine and mine alone. It's small, a 2-bedroom ranch from the 60s, but it sits on a decent lot with mature trees and a privacy fence that I specifically chose because I didn't want neighbors looking in. Someone had looked in anyway. I checked the backyard first. The gate was still latched, the fence intact, no obvious signs that anyone had climbed over or forced their way through. The grass was wet from last night's rain, but I couldn't see any footprints. Not that I'd know what to look for. I wasn't a detective. I was a guy in a bathrobe holding a Polaroid that shouldn't exist. The police were polite but unhelpful. An officer came out, took my statement, examined the photo with gloved hands. He told me it was probably a prank. Maybe kids from the neighborhood messing around with their parents' old camera. He suggested I install motion sensor lights, maybe get a dog. Said to call back if anything else happened. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept getting up to check the windows, peering through the curtains at my dark backyard, looking for shapes that didn't belong. The rain had started again around midnight, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm that usually helped me drift off. That night, it just sounded like fingers tapping against the glass. Nothing happened. No more photos, no strange sounds, no evidence that anyone was watching. By the end of the week, I'd almost convinced myself the officer was right. Just a prank. Just some bored teenager with a vintage camera and a weird sense of humor. Then the second Polaroid appeared. Same place. My welcome mat, face up, slightly damp. But this one was different. It showed my bedroom window. The angle was wrong for the backyard. This had been taken from the side of the house, through the narrow gap between my fence and my neighbor's. A gap barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, overgrown with bushes I'd been meaning to trim for months. In the photo, my bedroom light was on. The blinds were open. I always left them open at night because the room faced nothing but that narrow gap, and I'd never imagined anyone would be there. Through the window, blurred but recognizable, I could see myself, sitting on my bed, looking at my phone, completely unaware that someone was standing 10 feet away, watching me through the glass. I called the police again. Different officer this time, same response. No fingerprints on the Polaroid, no witnesses, no evidence of trespassing. They took a report, promised to increase patrols in the area, told me to consider security cameras. I ordered cameras that afternoon. 3 of them, one for the front porch, one for the backyard, one for that narrow gap on the side of the house. They arrived 2 days later, and I spent an entire Saturday installing them, running wires, setting up the app on my phone. By Sunday night, every approach to my house was covered. If anyone came near my windows again, I'd know. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The cameras recorded the usual things: mail carriers, squirrels, the neighbor's cat that liked to use my garden as a litter box. No mysterious figures, no one lurking near my windows, no explanation for the Polaroids I'd hidden in my desk drawer because I couldn't stand to look at them. I started to relax, went back to my normal routine, working at my desk during the day, watching TV in the evenings, sleeping with the blinds closed now, but otherwise acting like everything was fine. The whole thing started to feel distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Then I came home from the grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon and found a new Polaroid on my mat. This one showed my living room window. Taken at night, the interior lit up like a stage, curtains I thought were thick enough for privacy, apparently thin enough to see right through. I was on the couch in the photo, watching something on TV, a bowl of popcorn in my lap. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I could see in the reflection of the window glass. A face. Pale, slightly blurred, but unmistakably there. Looking in at me from the darkness outside, close enough to the window that their breath might have fogged the glass. And they were smiling. I checked the camera footage immediately, scrubbed through hours of recordings, looking for the moment when someone had approached my living room window, had pressed their face against the glass, had taken that photograph. The footage showed nothing, just my empty yard, my dark windows, the occasional flutter of leaves in the wind. Whoever was watching me knew about the cameras, and they wanted me to know they could get around them. I stopped sleeping through the night after that. Would jolt awake at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something outside my window. I'd check the camera feeds on my phone, scan every angle, look for any movement in the darkness. Nothing. Always nothing. Just my empty yard, my silent house, the rain that seemed to fall every night now tapping steadily against the glass. The fourth Polaroid came 5 days later. This one wasn't on the welcome mat. It was tucked under my windshield wiper, left sometime during the night while my car sat in the driveway. The image showed my bathroom window, frosted glass, supposedly impossible to see through, but the photo had been taken with some kind of flash or light source that cut right through the distortion. I was in the shower, just a silhouette, but unmistakably me, unmistakably naked, unmistakably vulnerable. I threw up in my kitchen sink, stood there heaving, hands gripping the counter, trying to process what this meant. Someone had watched me shower, had stood outside my bathroom window with a camera, had figured out how to see through glass designed specifically for privacy, had captured me in one of the few moments I should have been completely safe. And they'd left the evidence for me to find, like a gift, like a love letter. I called in sick to work, spent the day on the phone with security companies, getting quotes for alarm systems, motion sensors, anything that might tell me when someone was approaching my house. The prices were staggering, thousands of dollars I didn't really have, but I scheduled an installation for the following week anyway. I'd figure out the money later. Right now, I just needed to feel safe. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. Sat in my dark living room with all the curtains drawn, watching the camera feeds on my laptop, waiting for someone to appear. The rain had picked up around sunset, drumming against the roof in waves, filling the silence with white noise that made it hard to hear anything else. At 2:47 a.m., my motion sensor triggered. I grabbed my phone, heart slamming against my ribs, and pulled up the alert. The backyard camera. Movement detected near the fence line, exactly where that first photo had been taken. The feed showed nothing. Just rain, darkness, my empty yard. But the motion sensor kept triggering. Every few seconds, another alert. Movement detected. Movement detected. Movement detected. Something was out there, something the camera couldn't see, setting off the sensor over and over like a heartbeat. I should have called the police, should have stayed inside, doors locked, waiting for help to arrive. That's what a reasonable person would have done. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The rain hit me immediately, cold and driving, soaking through my t-shirt in seconds. I swept the flashlight across my backyard, looking for any sign of an intruder. The fence, the gate, the bushes along the property line, all empty, all undisturbed. I walked the perimeter twice, checking every shadow, every gap where someone might hide. Nothing. No one. But when I got back to my porch, there was a new Polaroid on the mat. It showed me, right now, standing in my backyard in the rain, flashlight in hand, looking in completely the wrong direction. The photo was still developing, still wet from the chemicals, the image gaining clarity as I watched. I'd been outside for maybe 5 minutes. The person who took this had been close enough to photograph me, had watched me search my own yard for them, and had somehow made it to my front porch to leave their trophy before I got back. They were playing with me. I stopped leaving the house after that. Had groceries delivered, told my boss I needed to work remotely for a while, invented excuses to avoid any situation that would require me to step outside. The security system was installed 3 days early. I paid extra for rush service, and suddenly, my home was a fortress. Sensors on every door, every window, cameras inside now, not just out. A panic button that would bring police within minutes. It didn't matter. The Polaroids kept coming. One showed my living room from an angle that could only have been taken from inside my house. Another showed me sleeping, taken through my bedroom window even though I'd installed blackout curtains specifically to prevent this. A third showed my face in extreme close-up, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, like someone had stood over my bed and photographed me from inches away. I checked the security footage, reviewed every second, every camera, every sensor log. Nothing had been triggered, no doors opened, no windows breached, no movement detected anywhere inside or outside my home. But someone had been in my bedroom. Someone had stood over me while I slept, close enough to touch, and I hadn't woken up. I started sleeping in my car after that, parked in my driveway with the doors locked and the keys in my hand, jerking awake every hour to check my surroundings. It was miserable. My back ached. I could never get comfortable. The rain drumming on the roof kept me in a constant state of half-alertness. But at least I could see in every direction. At least no one could get close without me knowing. On the third night, I woke to a tapping on my driver's side window. Not rain, something deliberate, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I turned my head slowly, already knowing what I'd see, already feeling that cold dread spreading through my chest. A face was pressed against the glass, pale, smiling, eyes locked on mine. In one hand, they held a Polaroid camera. In the other, a photo of me sleeping in my car. They'd been watching me all night, and now they wanted me to know. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because lights came on in my neighbor's house across the street. The face vanished from my window. 1 second it was there. Pale skin, dark eyes, that horrible smile. And the next, it was gone, melted into the darkness between streetlights like it had never existed. I heard footsteps, rapid and light, disappearing somewhere to my left. By the time I fumbled my phone out and hit the panic button, the street was empty. The police found nothing. No footprints in the wet grass, no fingerprints on my car, no witnesses except me and my neighbor, who'd only seen a dark shape moving away from my driveway. They took the Polaroid, the one of me sleeping in the car, as evidence, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't expect it to lead anywhere. "You actually saw them this time," the detective said. She was different from the patrol officers who'd come before. Older, more serious, actually taking notes instead of just going through the motions. "Can you describe them?" I tried. God, I tried. But every time I reached for details, they slipped away, male or female. I couldn't say, young or old, somewhere in between. The face had been so close to mine, separated by only a few inches of glass, and I couldn't remember anything except that smile, wide and wrong and hungry. "They knew I was watching the house," I said. "They avoided the cameras, the sensors, everything. When I started sleeping in my car, they adapted. They're always one step ahead." The detective didn't dismiss me like the others had. She looked at the stack of Polaroids I'd collected. I'd kept them all, even the ones that made me sick, and her expression got very careful. "Mr. Hayes, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She set down the photo of me sleeping in my bedroom. "Have you ever had a stalker before? An ex-partner, maybe? Someone who might have reason to fixate on you?" "No. I've been divorced for 3 years, and it was mutual. We don't even talk anymore." "Anyone at work? A neighbor who might have developed an interest?" "I work from home. I barely know my neighbors." I laughed, but it came out wrong. "I'm boring. I don't have enemies. I don't have anyone." She nodded slowly, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I'd like to send a forensic team to your house. Check the photos more thoroughly. See if we can pull any identifying information from the camera type or the film stock. Would that be all right?" I said yes. What else could I say? The forensic team arrived the next morning. 3 technicians in windbreakers, carrying cases of equipment I didn't recognize. They spent hours in my house, dusting for prints, checking for signs of forced entry, examining every window and door. I sat on my porch in the gray morning light, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching them work. Around noon, one of the technicians came outside. She looked shaken. "Mr. Hayes, we found something. In your attic." I didn't have an attic. At least, I didn't think I did. The house was a single-story ranch, no second floor, no visible access point. But the technician led me to my bedroom closet, pointed at a panel in the ceiling I'd never noticed before, and showed me the ladder they'd found folded up behind my clothes. Someone had been living in my crawl space. The space was maybe 4 feet tall, running the length of the house, insulated with ancient fiberglass that hung in dusty sheets from the rafters. The technicians had found a sleeping bag up there, empty water bottles, food wrappers, a small portable toilet, and photographs, hundreds of them. Not Polaroids, regular prints, color and black and white, taken over what must have been months. Me at my desk, me cooking dinner, me watching TV, me sleeping, showering, changing clothes. Every intimate moment of my life, documented and collected by someone who had been watching from 6 feet above my head. Some of the photos were older than my time in the house. I found images of the previous owners, an elderly couple I'd never met, going about their daily lives, eating breakfast, working in the garden, sleeping in the same bed where I now spent my nights. The stalker had been here for years, maybe decades, living in the walls, watching through gaps in the ceiling, documenting every person who'd ever called this house home. And the Polaroids on my porch, those were new. Those were personal. Those meant they wanted me to know. "We need to get you out of here," the detective said. She'd arrived an hour after the discovery, face grim, voice flat. "Right now. Pack a bag and find somewhere else to stay." "How did they get in?" I asked. "How did they live up there without me knowing?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, pity, maybe, or fear, and told me again to pack a bag. I stayed at a motel that night, 20 miles from my house, cash payment, fake name in the register. I sat on the stiff mattress and stared at the wall and tried to process what I'd learned. Someone had been living above me, listening to me sleep, watching me through holes I'd never thought to look for. They'd been doing this to people for years, maybe longer, accumulating evidence of lives that weren't theirs to witness. But why the Polaroids? Why start leaving proof after so long in the shadows? My phone buzzed. A notification from my home security system, which I'd forgotten to disable. Motion detected. Front porch camera. I opened the app with numb fingers. The feed showed my empty porch, my closed front door, my welcome mat where so many Polaroids had appeared. There was a new one sitting there now. Face up, slightly damp from the rain that had started falling sometime in the last hour. The image showed my motel room, The exterior, taken from the parking lot. My window perfectly framed in the center of the shot. And standing in that window, visible through the thin curtains, was my silhouette. They'd followed me. I didn't run this time. Maybe I should have. Maybe that's what a smarter person would have done. Grabbed their keys, fled into the night, kept moving until there was nowhere left to go. But I was tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being prey for something that seemed to know my every move before I made it. So instead of running, I turned off the lights, sat in the dark corner of my motel room with the curtain cracked just enough to see the parking lot, and waited. The rain intensified around midnight, fat drops hammering the pavement, turning the parking lot into a mirror of reflected neon from the motel sign. I watched through that narrow gap in the curtains, barely breathing, scanning every shadow for movement. At 2:33 a.m., I saw them, a figure standing at the far end of the lot, near the dumpsters. Just standing there in the rain, not moving, not approaching. Too far away to make out any features, but I could feel them looking at me. Could feel that attention like a weight on my chest. They raised something to their face, a flash of light, quick, bright, unmistakable. Another photograph. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, gave them my location, and told them there was an intruder in the parking lot. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, stay calm, help was on the way. I hung up and kept watching. The figure didn't move, just stood there, patient, like they knew exactly what I was doing and didn't care, like they'd done this before, played this game, watched other victims call for help that would arrive too late. Police lights appeared on the highway maybe 10 minutes later. As soon as the first flash of red and blue crested the hill, the figure turned and walked away. Not running, walking. Casual, unhurried, disappearing around the corner of the building before the cruiser even pulled into the lot. The officers searched for an hour, found nothing except wet footprints on the pavement already washing away in the rain. They offered to stay parked outside my room for the rest of the night, and I accepted, sitting awake until dawn with my back against the headboard and my eyes on that crack in the curtains. The next morning I went back to my house. Not to stay, I couldn't stay, not after what they'd found in the crawl space, but to look for answers. The police had finished their forensic sweep, taken the photographs as evidence, sealed off the attic access, but they hadn't found everything. They couldn't have. Whoever had been living in my walls had been there for years, and you don't spend that long in a place without leaving traces. I started in the crawl space, climbed the ladder with a flashlight in my teeth, pulling myself up into that cramped, dusty darkness where someone had slept feet above my head. The police had taken the sleeping bag, the food wrappers, the obvious signs of habitation. But I found other things. Carvings in the wooden beams, small deliberate marks that looked like tally marks at first, but resolved into something else when I looked closer. Dates, dozens of them, scratched into the wood with a knife or a nail, going back almost 40 years. The oldest one was from 1986. The most recent was 3 days ago. There were names too, scratched beside certain dates in handwriting that never changed, never aged, stayed exactly the same across 4 decades. Margaret and Howard Vance, 1986 to 2003. Dorothy Vance, alone, 2003 to 2011. Linda and Peter Shaw, 2011 to 2019. And then, at the bottom, freshest of all, David Hayes, 2021 to present. My name, my dates, carved into the bones of my house by someone who had been watching me since the day I moved in. I climbed back down and searched the rest of the house. Found more carvings, more traces. A loose floorboard in the hallway that concealed a cache of old photographs, decades worth of images showing the previous occupants in unguarded moments. Found peepholes drilled into walls, so small I'd never noticed them, positioned to give sightlines into every room. And in my bedroom closet, hidden behind the panel that accessed the crawl space, I found a journal. Leather-bound, worn soft with age, filled with handwriting that matched the carvings in the attic. I sat on my bed and read it, rain tapping against the windows, and learned the truth about what had been living in my walls. His name was Thomas Bellamy. He'd grown up in this house, the only child of parents who'd built it in 1952. When they died, within months of each other, in the winter of 1985, he hadn't been able to leave. So he'd stayed, hidden in the walls while the house was sold, while new families moved in, while life went on without him. He watched because watching was all he had, because the families who lived in his house became his family, whether they knew it or not. He documented their lives, celebrated their milestones, mourned their departures. He lived in the spaces between their walls and loved them from a distance they never knew existed. But he never made contact, never revealed himself, never left evidence of his presence, not until me. The journal entries from the last few months were different, more urgent, more desperate. He wrote about wanting to be seen, about being tired of watching, tired of hiding, tired of loving people who didn't know he existed. He wrote about the Polaroids, about choosing me specifically, because I lived alone, because I seemed lonely too, because he thought I might understand. He wrote about wanting to be let in. The final entry was dated yesterday. 3 sentences, written in handwriting, that shook. He's leaving. They all leave eventually, but this time I'm going with him. I looked up from the journal. The closet door was open, and standing in the shadows behind my hanging clothes, pale face emerging from the darkness like a moon rising, was Thomas Bellamy, smiling. He was smaller than I expected, thin, stooped, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through my bedroom curtains. His clothes were ancient, a faded flannel shirt, corduroy pants worn smooth at the knees, and he smelled like dust, and old paper, and something else underneath. Something organic. Something wrong. "You found my journal." His voice was soft, almost gentle, unused to speaking aloud. "I hoped you would. I wanted you to understand." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stand there with the journal clutched in my hands, staring at the man who had watched me sleep, who had photographed me in my most vulnerable moments, who had loved me from the darkness without ever asking permission. "I know what you're thinking," he said. He took a step forward, out of the closet, into the gray light of my bedroom. "You're thinking I'm crazy, that I'm dangerous. But I'm not, David. I would never hurt you. I just wanted to be close to someone again. You've been living in my walls." My voice came out as a croak. "For 3 years, watching me, watching over you." He smiled, and there was something almost childlike in it, hopeful. "There's a difference. I kept you safe. I made sure the house was warm, that the pipes didn't freeze, that nothing bad happened while you slept. I took care of you. The Polaroids. I wanted you to see me. After so long, I wanted someone to know I existed." He reached into his pocket, pulled out another photograph. This one showed the 2 of us, me standing frozen by the bed, him emerging from the closet, taken just now from some angle I couldn't identify. "I'm tired of being invisible, David. I'm tired of loving people who don't know I'm here." I thought about running. The bedroom door was behind me, maybe 6 feet away. I could make it if I moved fast enough, could get out of the house and call for help. But something in his eyes stopped me. Not threat, something sadder. Loneliness so profound it had curdled into something unrecognizable. "The other families," I said. "The Vances, the Shaws. What happened to them?" His face flickered. Just for a moment, a shadow passing behind his eyes. "They left. They always leave. I give them everything, my attention, my devotion, my entire life, and they leave anyway." He looked down at the photograph in his hands. "Dorothy was the worst. She lived alone, like you. I thought she understood." But when she found out about me, she screamed, called the police. I had to hide for weeks while they searched. His voice hardened. She sold the house a month later, never even said goodbye. Thomas. I said his name carefully, like handling something fragile. You need help. This isn't how people connect. You can't watch someone without their knowledge and call it love. Why not? He looked up, and his eyes were wet. I know everything about you, David. Your favorite foods, your sleeping patterns, the way you talk to yourself when you're working. I've seen you cry over your divorce. I've seen you laugh at stupid videos on your phone. I know you better than anyone else in the world. He stepped closer. How is that not love? I backed toward the door, slowly, trying not to trigger whatever was coiled behind that desperate expression. It's not love because I didn't choose it, because you took something from me, my privacy, my safety, my peace of mind, and you called it a gift. My hand found the doorknob behind me. Love isn't about watching, Thomas. It's about being seen. Both people, equally. Not one person hiding in the dark while the other lives their life unaware. His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked exactly like what he was. A broken old man who had spent 40 years alone, convinced that proximity was the same as connection. I don't know how to do it the other way, he whispered. I've been in the walls so long, I don't remember how to be in the room. Then learn. I turned the doorknob. Get help. Talk to someone. But not like this. Never like this. I opened the door and walked out of my bedroom, half expecting him to follow, to grab me, to do something violent and desperate. But he just stood there, photograph still clutched in his hands, watching me leave with that terrible, lonely expression. I called the police from my car. They found him still standing in my bedroom, unresisting, almost relieved. He went quietly, they told me later. Didn't say a word during the arrest, during the processing, during any of it. Just smiled that sad smile and let them take him away. Thomas Bellamy was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and criminal trespassing. He's in a psychiatric facility now, undergoing evaluation. His lawyer says he'll probably spend the rest of his life in institutional care, one kind or another. He's 73 years old. He's been hiding in houses since before I was born. I sold my house a month after his arrest. Couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't sleep in a bedroom where someone had watched me through holes in the ceiling. The new owners don't know the full story, just that there was a security incident and the previous owner relocated. I hope they never find out. I hope the walls stay empty for them. I live in an apartment now, 6th floor, no attic, no crawl space, no hidden places where someone could watch unseen. I check the closets every night before bed. I inspect the ceilings for holes that shouldn't be there. I sleep with the lights on more often than I'd like to admit. But sometimes, late at night, when the rain is loud against my windows and the building settles into silence, I think about Thomas Bellamy. I think about 40 years of watching, of loving people who never knew he existed, of building a life in the spaces between walls. And I wonder if he was right about one thing. Maybe we're all just watching each other, hoping to be seen. Maybe the only difference between Thomas and the rest of us is that he was honest about it. He didn't pretend the distance wasn't there. He just tried to close it the only way he knew how. It doesn't excuse what he did. Nothing could excuse that. But some nights, when I'm alone and the rain sounds like fingers on glass, I understand it. And that scares me more than anything else. Story 2. My door lock. App said unlocked by guest user. I never added a guest user. That was the first thing I checked, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, staring at the notification on my phone like it might change if I looked long enough. The smart lock app was open, showing the activity log for my front door, and right there in black and white was an entry that made no sense. 2:47 p.m. Front door unlocked by guest user. I'd installed the smart lock 6 months ago, after my building switched to a keyless entry system, and I decided to upgrade my apartment door to match. It was supposed to make me feel safer, no more worrying about lost keys, no more wondering if I'd remembered to lock up when I left. Just a deadbolt that I controlled from my phone, with a log of every entry and exit. I lived alone. I hadn't given anyone the access code, and I definitely hadn't created a guest user account. But according to the app, someone had unlocked my door 20 minutes ago, using credentials that shouldn't exist. I called my building's management office, got voicemail, tried the emergency maintenance line, and got a recorded message saying they'd return my call within 2 business days. Sat in my car with the engine running and the rain starting to spot my windshield, trying to decide what to do. The logical thing was to call the police. Tell them someone might have broken into my apartment, let them handle it. But what would I say? My door lock app showed a weird notification. There was no sign of forced entry, no alarm triggered. Nothing except a line of text on a screen that could have been a glitch, a bug, a hiccup in the software. I drove home anyway. Told myself I'd check the apartment, make sure nothing was missing, and then decide whether to escalate. Probably it was nothing. Probably the app had malfunctioned, logged some phantom access that never actually happened. These things weren't perfect. I'd read reviews about false notifications, connectivity issues, all sorts of technical problems. The parking lot of my building was quiet when I pulled in. Mid-afternoon on a Wednesday, most people at work, just a few cars scattered across the spaces. I sat there for a moment, watching the rain streak down my windshield, working up the courage to go inside. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, telling myself it was for the exercise, knowing it was because I wanted to approach slowly, wanted to give myself time to turn back if something felt wrong. The hallway was empty. My door looked exactly like it always did. Same scuffed paint, same brass numbers, same peephole staring back at me like an eye. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. Silence. Just the hum of the building's HVAC system and the muffled sound of someone's television a few doors down. I unlocked the door with my phone, watched the deadbolt retract, and pushed it open. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Dishes in the sink, laptop on the coffee table, jacket draped over the back of the couch. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed, no sign that anyone had been there. I walked through every room anyway. Checked the closets, looked under the bed, pulled back the shower curtain in the bathroom. Empty. All of it empty. Just my things, my space, my life undisturbed. I started to feel foolish. Started to convince myself it really had been a glitch, some software error that had generated a fake log entry. I made a mental note to contact the lock company's tech support, maybe reset the system entirely, and tried to put it out of my mind. Then I checked the app again. The activity log had updated while I was searching the apartment. New entries, time-stamped just minutes ago. 2:58 p.m. Front door locked by primary user. 3:03 p.m. Front door unlocked by guest user. 3:03 p.m. Front door locked by guest user. I was the primary user. The first entry was me, locking the door behind myself when I came in. But the other two, the unlock and immediate relock by guest user, those had happened while I was inside, while I was checking my closets and looking under my bed. Someone had unlocked my door, opened it, and then locked it again, in the span of seconds, while I was home. I ran to the front door. It was closed, deadbolt engaged, exactly as it should be. I pressed my eye to the peephole and saw nothing but empty hallway. But someone had been there. The app didn't lie. Someone with access I hadn't granted had opened my door and closed it again, and the only reason I hadn't heard anything was because I'd been in the back of the apartment, water running in the bathroom, completely unaware. Had they come in? Had they stepped inside, seen me, and retreated? Or had they just been testing the lock, confirming that their access worked, planning something for later? I called the police this time, showed them the app, explained the situation, watched them search my apartment with the same thoroughness I'd already applied. They found nothing. No one hiding in the closets, no signs of entry, no evidence that anything was wrong. Could be a software issue, one of them said. These smart devices aren't always reliable. But the timing, I said. It happened while I was here. Someone opened my door while I was inside. He shrugged. Or the app logged a duplicate entry. Or there's lag in the system. Or... He spread his hands. Ma'am, there's no one here. Nothing's missing. Without more to go on, there's not much we can do. They left. I stood in my apartment with all the lights on, rain tapping against the windows, and stared at my phone. The activity log was still open, and as I watched, a new entry appeared. 3:41 p.m. Guest user renamed to I Can See You. I looked up from the screen. The closet door across the room was open. I hadn't left it that way. I don't remember leaving the apartment. One moment, I was standing in my living room staring at that open closet door, and the next, I was in the hallway, back pressed against the wall, phone clutched to my chest like a shield. The door to my apartment was still open. I could see inside, the edge of my couch, the corner of my coffee table. Nothing moving, nothing out of place except that closet. That dark rectangle of shadow where someone could be standing, watching, waiting for me to come back inside. I called 911 again. Different officers this time. Same skepticism when they arrived. They searched the apartment. The closet was empty, they told me. Nothing inside but coats and boxes and the vacuum cleaner I never used. They checked everywhere else too. Every hiding spot, every corner. Found nothing. Are you sure you didn't leave the closet open yourself? One of them asked. Not unkindly, but with the practiced patience of someone who'd dealt with anxious women before. Easy to forget these things. I showed him the app, the renamed guest user, the log entries, the evidence that someone had access to my home who shouldn't. He looked at it for a long time, frowning, then handed my phone back. I'd contact the lock company if I were you, get them to reset your system, revoke any access you don't recognize, and maybe... He hesitated. Maybe stay somewhere else tonight, just in case. I didn't need to be told twice. I packed a bag with shaking hands, checking over my shoulder every few seconds, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rain had picked up outside, drumming against the windows in sheets, and every shadow in the apartment seemed to pulse with hidden movement. I stayed with my sister that night. Didn't tell her the whole story, just said there'd been a break-in attempt, that I didn't feel safe. She made up the couch for me and didn't ask questions, and I lay there in the dark, listening to rain on her roof and trying not to look at my phone. But I couldn't help it. Couldn't stop checking the app, watching for new entries, waiting for the guest user to do something else. At 3:17 a.m., it did. 3:17 a.m., front door unlocked by I Can See You. 3:17 a.m., front door locked by I Can See You. 3:18 a.m., front door unlocked by I Can See You. 3:18 a.m., front door locked by I Can See You. Over and over, unlock and lock, unlock and lock, the entries piling up faster than I could scroll. Someone was standing at my door in the middle of the night, opening and closing it, and they wanted me to know. I called my building's emergency line. This time, someone answered. A tired-sounding security guard who said he'd go check on my unit. I stayed on the line, listening to his footsteps echo through the phone, listening to him climb the stairs to my floor. "I'm outside your door now," he said. "It's closed, locked, no one around. Check the hallway cameras. Someone's been..." "Ma'am," he cut me off, voice carefully neutral. "The cameras on this floor have been out for maintenance since yesterday. There's no footage." Of course there wasn't. The lock activity stopped after that call. No more entries, no more unlock-lock cycles. just silence and rain, and the feeling that something was waiting for me to come home. I didn't go home for 3 days. Spent them at my sister's, working remotely, jumping at every notification on my phone. I contacted the smart lock company and explained the situation. They were apologetic but unhelpful. No record of a guest user being created on my account. No evidence of a security breach on their end. They offered to send a technician to replace the lock entirely, and I scheduled an appointment for the end of the week. On the 4th day, I went back to my apartment. The technician was supposed to meet me there at noon. I arrived early, wanting to pack more clothes, check on the place, make sure nothing had been disturbed. The hallway was quiet, the building peaceful, normal, like nothing had ever happened. My door was closed and locked. I checked the app. No activity since the night at my sister's. Whatever had been happening, it seemed to have stopped. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Same dishes in the sink, same jacket on the couch, same laptop on the coffee table. The closet door was closed now. I'd made sure of that before I left, and nothing seemed out of place. But something was wrong. I could feel it the moment I crossed the threshold. Something in the air, in the quality of the light, in the way the silence pressed against my ears. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking every room. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, all empty, all undisturbed. Then I got to the bedroom closet. There was a smell coming from inside. Faint, but unmistakable. The sour tang of body odor, of unwashed clothes, of someone who had been living in a small space for too long. I opened the door. The closet was empty, but on the floor, half hidden behind my hanging clothes, was a sleeping bag, a pillow, empty water bottles and food wrappers crushed and discarded in a pile. And on the wall, scratched into the paint with something sharp, a message. I liked sleeping next to you. See you tonight. My phone buzzed. New activity in the lock app. Guest user renamed to Behind You. I turned around. Nothing. The bedroom was empty. Just my bed, my dresser, the window with rain streaking down the glass. No one standing behind me. No figure lurking in the doorway. No monster waiting to grab me. But my front door was open. I could see it from the bedroom, that rectangle of hallway light where there should have been solid wood. Someone had unlocked it. Someone had opened it, and they'd done it silently, in the seconds while my back was turned, while I was staring at the evidence of their occupation. I ran, not toward the door, away from it, toward the bedroom window. Fire escape, I was thinking. 3 floors up, but I could make it, could climb down, could get out of this building and never come back. My hands found the latch, shoved upward, and the window didn't move, painted shut. I'd complained about it when I moved in, and the landlord had promised to fix it, and I'd never followed up because when would I ever need to use the fire escape anyway? The front door was still open, still empty. Whoever had unlocked it was gone, or waiting just out of sight, around the corner, listening for my footsteps. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911 for the 3rd time in a week, whispered my address to the dispatcher, told them someone was in my apartment. She asked me to stay on the line, asked me to describe what was happening, and I couldn't speak because I'd just noticed something I'd missed before. The lock app was still open on my screen. New entries were appearing in real time. 11:47 a.m. Front door locked by behind you. 11:47 a.m. Front door unlocked by behind you. 11:47 a.m. Front door locked by behind you. Whoever this was, they were playing with me, opening and closing the door over and over, knowing I could see every action, knowing I was trapped in my bedroom with a window that wouldn't open and a door that led to them. Ma'am, are you still there? They're at my door, I whispered. They keep locking and unlocking it. They know I'm watching. Officers are on their way. Stay where you are. Stay hidden if you can. The lock cycling stopped. One final entry appeared. 11:48 a.m. Guest user renamed to coming in. I heard footsteps. slow, deliberate, crossing my living room, coming toward the bedroom. I don't know what made me do it. Panic, maybe, or some animal instinct that decided fight was better than freeze. I grabbed the lamp from my nightstand, yanked the cord from the wall, and positioned myself beside the bedroom door. If they came through, I'd hit them as hard as I could, and run past while they were stunned. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Silence, just rain against the window and my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. Then a voice. Male, calm, almost friendly. "I know you're in there, Megan. I've been watching you for a long time." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat had closed up, my hands shaking so badly the lamp rattled against the wall. "You left your bedroom door open most nights. Did you know that? I'd stand in the hallway and watch you sleep. You're beautiful when you're sleeping. So peaceful. So unaware." The doorknob turned. "I learned your schedule. When you leave, when you come home, when you shower, when you eat. I know everything about you, Megan. I know you better than anyone." The door opened slowly. I could see a hand, pale, long-fingered, wrapping around the edge. "I just want to talk. That's all. I've been waiting so long to talk to you face to face." Sirens. Distant but getting closer, cutting through the rain, getting louder with every second. The hand paused. "That's unfortunate." The voice had changed, still calm, but colder now. Disappointed. I was hoping we'd have more time. The hand withdrew. Footsteps again, rapid this time, moving away. I heard my front door open and close, heard the lock engage behind him, and then nothing except the sirens screaming up to the building. The police found evidence everywhere, not just in the closet, throughout my entire apartment. Hidden cameras, the size of shirt buttons, tucked into corners and shelves and air vents. 11 of them in total, covering every room, every angle. The feeds were being transmitted to a server they couldn't trace, routed through enough proxies to make the source untraceable. He'd been watching me for months. Every moment I thought I was alone, every private thing I did in my own home. He'd seen it all. The sleeping bag in the closet wasn't the beginning. It was an escalation. He'd graduated from watching to visiting, from visiting to staying, from staying to making contact. The smart lock had been compromised from the start. The technician from the company explained it to me later, after the police had finished their sweep. Someone had intercepted the initial setup, cloned the access credentials, created a shadow account that didn't show up in normal logs. They'd had a key to my apartment since the day I installed the lock. This wasn't opportunistic, the detective told me. Whoever did this targeted you specifically. They planned this for months, maybe longer. But why me? She didn't have an answer. Neither did anyone else. They never caught him. The cameras, the sleeping bag, the scratched message on my wall, all of it led nowhere. No fingerprints, no DNA, no identifiable information. Just the ghost of someone who had woven himself into my life without my knowledge, who had watched me and studied me and decided that I belonged to him. And the app entries were the worst part. Because the night I stayed at my sister's, while the lock was cycling open and closed at 3 a.m., there was one entry I hadn't noticed at first. One that only showed up when the forensic team examined my phone in detail. 3:22 a.m. Guest user location. Inside apartment. He hadn't been at the door. He'd been inside. For 5 minutes, while the lock cycled to cover the sound of his movement, he'd been inside my apartment doing God knows what. And I'd been 20 miles away, watching the notifications, thinking I was safe. I moved out of that apartment within a week. Broke my lease, forfeited the deposit, didn't care about any of it. I couldn't sleep there, couldn't shower there, couldn't exist in a space that had been so thoroughly violated. Every corner held the memory of a camera. Every shadow might contain someone watching. My sister helped me find a new place, A sublet in a different neighborhood, cash payment, no paper trail. I didn't put my name on the utilities, didn't forward my mail, didn't tell anyone except her and the detective working my case where I'd gone. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. I started to breathe again, started to sleep through the night, to stop checking over my shoulder every few seconds, to believe that maybe I'd escaped. The new apartment had no smart devices, just deadbolts and chains, physical locks I could see and touch and trust. I swept for cameras every day, checked every vent and outlet and corner, found nothing. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe the police presence had scared him off, made him realize the risk wasn't worth it anymore. Maybe I was finally, truly safe. Then I got the letter. No return address, no postmark, just my name written on the envelope in neat handwriting. It had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. I found it when I woke up, lying on the hardwood like it had always been there. Inside was a photograph. Me, in my new apartment, sitting on my new couch, looking at my phone, completely unaware that someone was capturing the image. The angle was wrong for any of the windows, too high, too centered. It had been taken from inside the apartment, from somewhere above me. I looked up at the ceiling. The smoke detector was directly overhead. Small, white, exactly like every other smoke detector I'd ever seen. But when I climbed on a chair and unscrewed the cover, I found it. A camera. Tiny, wireless, already transmitting. He'd been in my new apartment. He'd installed surveillance before I even moved in, and I'd been living under his gaze for 3 weeks, thinking I'd escaped. The photograph had a message written on the back. "You can't hide from me, Megan. I'll always find you. I'll always be watching. We belong together." I called the detective. She came within the hour, bringing a forensic team that swept the entire apartment. They found 2 more cameras, one in the bedroom, one in the bathroom, all of them installed professionally, hidden so well that my daily sweeps had missed them entirely. "He knew you'd look," the detective said. "He put them in places you wouldn't think to check. This guy knows what he's doing." "How did he find me?" My voice was steady, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I didn't tell anyone. I paid cash. There's no way he should have known. He probably followed you, or followed your sister." She looked uncomfortable. These cases, the perpetrators are often more sophisticated than we expect. They have patience, resources. They treat it like a job. "So what do I do? Move again? Keep running until he gets bored?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The forensic team made another discovery before they left. One that changed everything. The cameras in my new apartment weren't new. The serial numbers dated them to over a year ago, long before I'd moved in, long before the sublet had even been listed. He hadn't installed them after I arrived. He'd installed them in advance, which meant he'd known I would end up in this specific apartment. Somehow, he'd predicted where I would run, had prepared the space before I ever set foot in it, had been waiting for me to walk into his trap. "That's not possible," I said. "I chose this place randomly. My sister found it on a subletting website. There's no way anyone could have known." The detective was already on her phone, talking to someone at the station. I watched her face go pale as she listened. "The subletting listing," she said when she hung up. "We traced it. The person who posted it, the supposed owner of this apartment, doesn't exist. Fake name, fake credentials, fake everything." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "He created the listing," she continued, "months ago, set it up specifically for you, waited until you needed to run, then made sure your sister found it." She looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear. "Megan, this isn't just stalking. This is something else entirely." I spent that night at the police station. They didn't have anywhere safe to put me. No witness protection for stalking cases, no budget for round-the-clock security. But they let me sleep in an interview room with an officer stationed outside the door. I didn't sleep. just sat there in the fluorescent light, rain streaking down the small window near the ceiling, thinking about what the detective had said. He'd created the apartment listing months in advance, before I even knew I'd need to run, which meant either he could predict the future, or he'd been planning this for so long that every move I made was already accounted for, every escape route mapped, every hiding place prepared. I thought about the cameras in my first apartment, 11 of them, installed God knows when. I thought about the smart lock, compromised from day one. I thought about all the months I'd lived there thinking I was alone, thinking I was safe, thinking my life was my own. How long had he been watching? How long had he been planning this? And the worst question, the one I couldn't stop asking myself as the rain fell and the hours crept toward dawn. If he'd predicted where I would run before I even knew I needed to run, what else had he predicted? What was he planning next? They found him 3 days later. Not through investigation, not through forensics, not through any of the careful police work that had led nowhere for weeks. He turned himself in, walked into the station at 4 a.m, rain dripping from his coat, and asked to speak to the detective handling my case. His name was Marcus Webb, 41 years old, IT specialist, no prior criminal record. He'd worked for the company that manufactured my smart lock, had access to the back-end systems, the installation protocols, the customer database. He'd seen my name when I registered my device and decided, for reasons he couldn't articulate, that I was the one. She was perfect, he told the detective during his interrogation. I watched the recording later, unable to look away, needing to understand. The way she moved through her apartment, the way she talked to herself when she was alone. I'd never seen anyone so unguarded, so real. He'd been watching me for almost 2 years, since before I moved into that apartment, since before I bought the smart lock. He'd found me on social media first, then tracked down my address, then waited for an opportunity to get closer. When I installed the lock, it was like I'd handed him a key to my entire life. The cameras came next. He'd pose as a maintenance worker, a delivery driver, a building inspector, whatever got him through the door while I was at work. Over the course of 6 months, he'd wired my entire apartment for surveillance, watched me eat, sleep, shower, cry, watched me live my life without any idea that I had an audience. I never meant to scare her, he said on the recording. His voice was calm, almost wistful. I just wanted to be close to her, to know her, the Polaroids, the messages. I thought if she knew someone was watching, she might feel less alone. He thought he was helping me, thought his obsession was a gift. The fake apartment listing had been his masterpiece. He'd studied my sister's browsing habits, learned what sites she used, what criteria she searched for. He'd created the perfect trap and waited for me to walk into it, knowing that when I ran, I'd run exactly where he wanted me to go. I would never hurt her, he insisted, over and over. I love her. I've always loved her. He's in prison now, convicted of stalking, breaking, and entering, illegal surveillance, and a dozen other charges I've tried to forget. The prosecutor said he'd be locked up for at least 15 years, maybe longer. I should feel safe. I don't. Because during his confession, Marcus said something that the detective didn't include in the official report. Something she told me privately, weeks later, when I pressed her for details. He said you weren't the first. I stared at her. What do you mean? Before you, there was someone else, a woman named Christina. He watched her for almost 3 years before she moved away. The detective's face was carefully blank. We looked into it. Christina Vance, 29 years old, lived in an apartment 2 blocks from your building. She moved to Seattle 18 months ago. Did she know? About him? That's the thing. The detective hesitated. Christina Vance doesn't exist anymore. Her social media is gone. Her phone number is disconnected. The Seattle address she filed with the post office belongs to an empty lot. She met my eyes. We can't find any trace of her after she left the city. I felt the floor drop away beneath me. He says he stopped watching her when she moved, says he let her go, found you instead. The detective's voice was quiet, but we only have his word for that. And everything else he's told us has been selective. Marcus Webb is in prison. I know this. I've seen the booking photos, the court documents, the news articles about his sentencing. He's behind bars, locked away, unable to reach me. But I think about Christina Vance. I think about the 18 months between when she disappeared and when Marcus started watching me. I think about all the things a man with his skills could do in 18 months, all the places he could hide a body, all the ways he could make someone vanish without a trace. And I think about what he said during his confession, the part that keeps me awake at night, that makes me check the locks 3 times before bed, that has me sweeping for cameras in every room of every place I've lived since. She's not the last, you know. There will be others after her. There are always others. He smiled when he said it. That same calm, almost gentle smile I'd heard in his voice through my bedroom door. I've been doing this a long time. You don't really think I'm the only one, do you? I live in a new city now. New name, new job, new everything. I don't have smart devices. Don't have social media. Don't have anything that connects me to the person I used to be. But sometimes, late at night, when rain taps against my window and the building settles into silence, I check my door. Not the lock. I don't trust electronic locks anymore. Just the physical deadbolt, the chain, the doorstop I wedge under the handle every night. And sometimes, in that moment before sleep takes me, I hear a sound. A soft click like a lock disengaging. A whisper of movement, like someone settling into a space just out of sight. A breath held and released, patient as stone. Marcus Webb is in prison. I know this. I have to believe this. But I also know that he was right about one thing. There are always others, and somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between surveillance and safety, someone else is watching. Someone is always watching, and sooner or later they'll find a way in. Story 3, the car that parked outside my house every night with no driver. The car was a dark blue sedan. Nothing special about it. No custom plates, no bumper stickers, no distinguishing features at all. The kind of car you'd see 100 times a day and never remember. That's probably why it took me so long to notice it was there every night. I'm 37, recently relocated for work, living in a rental house on a quiet street in a suburb where nothing ever happens. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and leave their garage doors open. I'd moved from the city 6 months ago, and the silence still felt strange. No sirens, no traffic, no ambient noise of humanity pressing in from all sides. Just stillness, and the occasional dog barking, and the rain that seemed to fall every other night like clockwork. The first time I consciously noticed the car was a Thursday in early October. I'd gotten up around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom, and on my way back to bed, I glanced out the window that faced the street. It was parked directly across from my house. Engine off, lights off, no movement inside. Just a dark shape sitting at the curb, slightly too far from the street light to be fully illuminated. I didn't think much of it. People parked on streets. Maybe a neighbor had guests. Maybe someone had car trouble and left it overnight. I went back to bed and forgot about it by morning. The car was gone when I left for work. I didn't give it another thought. But it was there again the next night. Same spot, same position, same empty stillness. I noticed it when I took out the trash around 11, and it was still there when I woke up at 3 to the sound of rain against my window. This time, I watched it for a while. Stood at my bedroom window in the dark, curtain pulled back just enough to see, waiting for something to happen. A dome light coming on, a door opening, any sign that someone was inside. Nothing. The rain fell, the streetlight flickered, and the car sat empty. By the third night, I was paying attention. I noted the time when it appeared, sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, based on when I first saw it each evening. I noted when it left, always before 6 a.m., gone by the time I woke up for work. I walked past it once, casually, like I was just taking an evening stroll. The windows were tinted dark, but not illegally so. I couldn't see inside, but I couldn't see any obvious shapes either. No silhouette of a driver, no indication that anyone was there. But someone had to be driving it. Cars don't park themselves. Someone was bringing this vehicle to my street every night, leaving it across from my house for hours, and then driving it away before dawn. I asked my neighbor about it. Dave, retired, lived 2 houses down, spent most of his evenings on his porch watching the street like it was his personal television. Blue sedan? He scratched his chin, thinking. Can't say I've noticed it, but I'm usually in bed by 9. Eyes aren't what they used to be anyway. No one else on the street seemed to have noticed either, or if they had, they didn't care. It was just a parked car. What was there to notice? I started photographing it. Every night, same angle, timestamp visible in the corner. Building a record, I told myself. Evidence in case something happened. In case I needed to prove that this wasn't paranoia, that something strange was actually occurring. After 2 weeks, I had 14 photos of the same car in the same spot. 14 nights of it appearing after dark and vanishing before dawn. 14 nights of no driver, no movement, no explanation. On the 15th night, something changed. The car arrived earlier than usual. I saw it pull onto my street around 8:30 while I was washing dishes at my kitchen sink. Watched it roll slowly past my house, brake lights flaring briefly, then continue to the end of the block and turn around. It came back, slower this time, and parked in its usual spot, directly across from my front door. The engine shut off. The lights went dark, and no one got out. I stood at my sink, hands still wet, watching through the window. The car just sat there, silent and still, while the last light of evening faded into night. I must have watched for 20 minutes, waiting for a door to open, for a figure to emerge, for something that would explain what I was seeing. Nothing. The car was empty when it arrived, and it stayed empty. That wasn't possible. Someone had to have been driving it. I'd watched it turn around, watched it park. Cars don't drive themselves. Not regular sedans, not in quiet suburbs, not with that kind of deliberate searching movement. But the car was empty. I was certain of it. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept getting up to check, to make sure it was still there, to confirm I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Every time, the same view. Dark blue sedan, motionless, empty, waiting. Waiting for what? In the morning, it was gone, same as always. I walked across the street and stood where it had been parked, looking for any trace of its presence. Tire marks, oil spots, anything. The pavement was clean. The grass along the curb was undisturbed. There was no evidence that any car had ever parked there at all. I checked my phone, scrolled through the photos I'd taken over the past 2 weeks. They were gone, all 14 of them, deleted from my camera roll, no trace in my recently deleted folder, nothing in my cloud backup, like they'd never existed, like the car wanted me to have no proof. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and waited for it to arrive. 8:30 came and went. 9:30. The street stayed empty, the rain started falling, and I began to wonder if maybe I'd scared it off somehow, if whatever strange thing was happening had decided to move on. Then my phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. No message, just a photo. Me, sitting on my porch, taken from inside a car parked across the street. A car I couldn't see because it didn't have its lights on. A car that was there right now, watching me, invisible in the dark. I looked up from my phone. The headlights flashed once. Then the engine started and the car drove away. I called the police that night, showed them the text, explained the pattern, told them everything I'd observed over the past 2 weeks. They took a report, promised to increase patrols in the area. looked at me with the particular expression cops reserve for people they think might be wasting their time. "Could be someone messing with you," the officer said. "Prank, maybe. You got any enemies? Ex-wife? Disgruntled co-worker?" I didn't. I'd moved here specifically because I had no connections, no complications, no one who would care enough to follow me to a suburb 300 miles from my old life. The officer nodded like that confirmed something and told me to call back if anything else happened. Something else happened the next night. The car returned at its usual time, parking in its usual spot. But this time, when I looked out my window, the interior dome light was on. I could see inside clearly. The empty driver's seat, the empty passenger seat, the pristine upholstery that looked like it had never been sat on. And on the dashboard, propped against the windshield so I could read it from my window, was a sign. Hand-lettered black marker on white cardboard, the words large enough to see from 50 feet away. "I see you seeing me." I didn't go outside, didn't call the police again, just stood at my window, heart pounding, watching that empty car with its dome light glowing like an invitation. After about an hour, the light went off. The car sat in darkness for another 3 hours. Then, around 4 in the morning, the headlights came on, the engine started, and it drove away. No driver visible, no explanation possible. I tried to follow it the next night. Sat in my own car in my driveway, lights off, waiting for the sedan to appear. When it pulled onto my street at 8:47 p.m., I was ready. Let it park, let it settle into its usual spot, then started my engine and pulled out after it when it began to move at 4:15 a.m. I lost it within 3 blocks, not because it was driving fast or taking evasive maneuvers. It just vanished. I watched it turn left at the stop sign at the end of my street, followed 10 seconds behind, and when I made the same turn, the road was empty. No taillights, no sedan, no trace of the car I'd been following. I drove around for an hour, searching every side street, every parking lot, every place a car might hide. Found nothing. Came home as the sun was rising, exhausted and confused, and found something waiting on my porch. A photograph, printed on glossy paper, tucked under my welcome mat. It showed me in my car, sitting in my driveway, watching the street. Taken from inside the sedan, through its tinted windows, at an angle that should have been impossible given where it was parked. On the back, in the same handwriting as the sign, "You can't follow where I go." I installed cameras the next day, 4 of them, covering every angle of my property, the street, the driveway, the front door, the backyard. If the car came back, I'd have video evidence, something the police couldn't dismiss, something I could use to prove I wasn't imagining this. The car came back that night, parked in its usual spot at 9:12 p.m. I watched the live feed on my phone, saw the sedan sitting there, saw the empty street stretching away in both directions, recorded 3 hours of footage, checking periodically to make sure the cameras were working, feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. At midnight, the feed glitched. Just for a second. A flicker of static, a moment of black, then back to the normal view. But something had changed. The car was still there, but it had moved. Closer. It was now parked directly in front of my house instead of across the street, so close that my front camera could see nothing but its hood and windshield. I hadn't seen it move. The cameras hadn't captured it moving. One moment it was 50 feet away, and the next it was right there, like it had simply appeared in a new location. On the windshield, another sign. Cameras can't see everything. I ran to the window. The car was there, just as the camera showed, close enough that I could have hit it with a stone from my porch. The dome light was on again, illuminating the empty interior, and propped on the passenger seat was something that made my stomach drop. A laptop, open, screen facing the window, displaying a live feed of me standing at my window, watching the car. The image moved when I moved. When I raised my hand, the figure on the screen raised its hand. When I stepped back, It stepped back. Someone, something, was watching me right now, from close enough to capture real-time video, and they wanted me to know. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and ran to my bedroom at the back of the house. Told the dispatcher there was an intruder, gave my address, stayed on the line while she promised units were on the way. "Sir, can you describe the vehicle?" "Dark blue sedan. It's parked right in front of my house. There's no one inside, but it's watching me somehow. There's a camera." "Sir, I'm pulling up your address now. Our patrol car is on your street." A pause. "He says there's no vehicle parked in front of your house." I went back to the window. The car was gone. The street was empty. My front camera showed nothing but wet pavement and the glow of the streetlight. But on my porch, placed carefully on the top step, was the laptop from the passenger seat. The screen was still on, still showing a live feed, still showing me standing at my window, looking out at an empty street. The camera angle was from inside my house. I tore the house apart looking for it. Every room, every closet, every corner and crevice where a camera might hide. The police helped. 2 officers who'd arrived expecting a routine disturbance call and found themselves searching for surveillance equipment that shouldn't exist. We checked the vents, the smoke detectors, the outlets, everywhere I'd read that hidden cameras could be concealed. We found nothing, but the laptop kept showing the feed, me, moving through my house, checking rooms, growing more frantic with each empty search. The angle shifted as I moved, tracking me from room to room, always watching, always centered on my face. "This isn't possible," one of the officers said. He was holding the laptop, tilting it like changing the angle might reveal some trick. "There's no wireless signal, no cellular connection. This thing isn't connected to anything." But the feed was live, real time, no delay, showing us exactly what we were doing at the moment we did it. "Where's it coming from?" I asked. No one had an answer. They took the laptop as evidence, told me they'd have their tech people examine it, figure out how it worked, trace it back to whoever was doing this. I didn't believe them. I'd seen the way they looked at each other, the silent communication that said, "This is beyond us. This is wrong. Let's get out of here." I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my living room with every light on, watching the street through my window, waiting for the car to return. It didn't. The street stayed empty, the rain fell steadily, and by morning I was exhausted enough to consider the possibility that I was losing my mind. Then I got a call from the detective assigned to my case. "Mr. Aldridge, we need you to come down to the station. There's something you should see." I drove there in a daze, running on coffee and fear. The detective met me in the lobby, a tired-looking woman named Reeves, who'd clearly been working on this longer than her shift allowed. "The laptop," she said, leading me to an interview room. "Our tech people managed to trace the video signal. It took all night, but they found the source." "Where?" She didn't answer, just opened the door and gestured for me to sit down. On the table was a file folder. She slid it across to me, and I opened it to find a stack of photographs and printed documents. "The car you've been seeing," she said. "We ran the plates." I never got the plates. It was always too dark. "We got them from your security footage. One frame, just barely visible." She pointed to the first photograph, a blurry image of the sedan's rear end, license plate just legible in the corner. "The car is registered to a man named Edward Marsh, lived about 20 miles from here, in Riverside Heights." "Lived?" "Edward Marsh died 14 years ago." I looked up from the file. "That's not possible. I've been seeing this car for weeks. Someone's been driving it." That's what I thought too, so I did some digging. She pulled out another document, a police report, yellowed with age. Edward Marsh was found dead in his car on November 3, 2010, parked on a residential street, engine running, no signs of trauma or foul play. Coroner ruled it a heart attack. So someone else has the car now. It was sold, or the car was impounded after his death. No next of kin to claim it. no will specifying what should happen to it. She met my eyes. It was crushed at a salvage yard in 2011. I confirmed it this morning. That car doesn't exist anymore, Mr. Aldridge. The room felt very cold. Then, what's been parking outside my house? Detective Reeves pulled out the last item in the folder. Another photograph, this one much older. A faded snapshot of a man standing next to a dark blue sedan, smiling at the camera. Edward Marsh bought that car new in 1987, drove it every day for 23 years. According to his neighbors, he was obsessive about it. Washed it twice a week, never let anyone else drive it, treated it like... She paused, like it was alive. I stared at the photograph. Edward Marsh was ordinary looking, middle-aged, thinning hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But there was something in his expression, a possessiveness, a hunger, that made my skin crawl. "The laptop," I said. "You said you traced the signal." "That's the part I can't explain." Detective Reeves looked uncomfortable. "The signal was coming from coordinates about 20 miles from here. We sent a unit to check it out. And it's a salvage yard, the same one where Edward Marsh's car was crushed 14 years ago." She pulled out one final photograph and laid it on the table. This is what they found at the exact coordinates of the signal source. The image showed a cube of compressed metal, rusted, weathered, sitting in a pile of similar cubes at what was clearly an automobile graveyard. "That's the car," she said quietly. "Or what's left of it, crushed down to about 4 cubic feet of scrap metal." I looked at the cube, at the rust and the twisted steel and the faint trace of dark blue paint still visible on one edge. "The signal was coming from inside that cube, Mr. Aldridge. A live video feed, broadcasting from a car that was destroyed 14 years ago." She closed the folder. "I don't know what you've been seeing outside your house. I don't know how to explain any of this, but whatever it is, I don't think it's something the police can help you with." I drove home in silence. The rain had stopped, the sky clearing to a pale gray that offered no comfort. When I turned onto my street, I saw it immediately. The dark blue sedan, parked in its usual spot, waiting. But this time, the driver's side door was open, and standing beside the car, looking directly at my approaching headlights, was a man. Middle-aged, thinning hair, an ordinary face I recognized from a faded photograph. Edward Marsh smiled at me. Then he got into the car, closed the door, and drove away. I should have left that night. Should have packed a bag, driven in the opposite direction, and never looked back. But something kept me there. Not courage, not stubbornness, but something closer to paralysis. The kind of frozen fascination that makes people stare at accidents, unable to look away from things they know will haunt them. I needed to understand. Why me? Why this street? Why had a dead man and his destroyed car chosen my house to haunt? I spent the next 3 days researching Edward Marsh. The internet gave me fragments. An obituary from 2010, sparse and impersonal. A few mentions in local news archives. He'd worked as a claims adjuster for an insurance company, never married, no children, no notable achievements. A man who had lived and died without leaving much of a mark on the world, except for his car. Every mention of Edward Marsh included some reference to his devotion to that dark blue sedan. Neighbors called it an obsession. Co-workers joked about it. One article quoted a colleague saying, "Ed loved that car more than most people love their families. He used to say it was the only thing that never let him down." I dug deeper, found the address where he'd died. A residential street in a neighborhood about 20 miles from mine. Drove there on a gray afternoon, rain threatening but not yet falling, and parked where the police report said his body had been found. It was an ordinary street, similar to mine actually. Quiet, tree-lined, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. I sat in my car and tried to imagine Edward Marsh spending his final moments here, alone in his beloved sedan, heart-stopping while the engine idled. Then I noticed the house, the one directly across from where I was parked. A small ranch, well maintained, with a for rent sign in the front yard that looked like it had been there for a while. I got out and walked closer. The house number was 417. My house number was 417. Same layout, same style, same position relative to the street. Edward Marsh had died parked in front of a house that was almost identical to mine. I called the rental company listed on the sign, asked about the property's history, how long it had been vacant, who had lived there before. The agent was chatty, happy to have someone interested. It's been hard to rent, honestly. Beautiful house, great neighborhood, but people don't seem to stay long. We've had maybe 6 tenants in the last 10 years, and none of them lasted more than a few months. Why not? A pause. They all said the same thing, actually. Complained about a car that kept parking outside. Said it made them uncomfortable. She laughed nervously. We've never seen it ourselves. Must be some kind of local legend or something. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time, watching the house, watching the street, waiting for something to appear. It didn't. Not there. But when I got home that evening, the sedan was already waiting. Parked in its usual spot, dome light on, Edward Marsh sitting motionless behind the wheel. This time he wasn't smiling. He was staring at my house with an intensity that made my chest tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was fighting the urge to do something terrible. I parked in my driveway and sat there, engine running, watching him watch my house. Neither of us moved for almost an hour. Then he turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were wrong. Not the right color, not the right shape, just wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Empty and hungry at the same time, like holes cut into something that wanted to consume everything it saw. He raised one hand from the steering wheel, pointed at me, then pointed at my house, then made a gesture I didn't understand at first. His hand rotating, turning something invisible. A key. He was miming turning a key. My front door was locked. I checked it 3 times before leaving. But I knew, with sudden horrible certainty, that when I went inside, something would be different. I should have stayed in my car, should have driven away, called the police, done anything except walk toward my front door with shaking hands and a heart that felt like it was trying to escape my chest. But I was tired of being afraid, tired of not understanding, tired of being watched by something that refused to explain itself. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was cold, much colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes your breath visible in the air. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, looking for whatever had changed. I found it in the spare bedroom, the room I never used, the one that had been empty since I moved in. The door was closed. I always left it open, and when I pushed it open, the cold intensified, pouring out like something physical. The room wasn't empty anymore. There was furniture inside, old furniture arranged with obvious care. A bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp. Everything looked like it belonged to another era, another decade, another life entirely. On the dresser was a framed photograph. Edward Marsh, younger, standing in front of this house. My house. Smiling at the camera with one arm draped over the roof of his dark blue sedan. On the back of the frame, in faded ink, "Home at last, 417 Maple Street, 1987. This had been his house. Before I lived here, before whoever lived here before me, Edward Marsh had lived in this exact house, in this exact room. And now he'd come back. Behind me, I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, coming closer. And underneath them, the soft jingle of car keys. I didn't turn around. Some instinct, older than thought, told me that turning around would be the wrong thing to do. That whatever was walking down my hallway existed more fully when it was seen, became more real the more attention you gave it. So I stood there in the cold of that impossible bedroom, staring at Edward Marsh's photograph, listening to footsteps that stopped just behind me. "You live in my house." His voice was wrong, too flat, too hollow, like sound traveling through water, like something that had forgotten how living people spoke and was doing its best to imitate. "I know," I said. "I didn't know it was yours. I just rented it." They all say that, all the people who come after. The floorboards creaked as he shifted his weight. They move into my house, sleep in my rooms, act like they belong here. "I can leave. I'll pack tonight, find somewhere else." They all say that too. I heard him move closer, felt the cold intensify, wrapping around me like a second skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. "I died alone," Edward Marsh said. "Did you know that? Heart attack, sitting in my car, parked in front of a house that looked just like this one. I thought I'd made it home, thought I could finally rest." His voice cracked on the last word. "But it wasn't home. It was just a house that looked like home, and I couldn't find my way back. Why are you here? What do you want?" Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe he'd vanished, gone back to whatever limbo he'd emerged from. Then, "I want someone to remember me." I turned around. Edward Marsh stood in the doorway, solid and present and utterly wrong. His skin was the gray of old newspaper. His eyes were holes that led somewhere I didn't want to see. He was holding his car keys in one hand, clutching them like a talisman, like they were the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. "I drove that car for 23 years, he said. "It was the only thing I ever loved, the only thing that was truly mine. And when I died, they crushed it, turned it into scrap metal and forgot I ever existed." His empty eyes fixed on mine. "Do you know what that's like? To be erased? To have the only thing you cared about destroyed like it meant nothing?" "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Sorry doesn't help. Sorry doesn't bring back what I lost." He took a step into the room. "But you can." "How?" He raised his hand, the one holding the keys, and held them out toward me. "Take them. Take the keys and the car and me with it. Let me ride with you. Let me exist through you. Let me have a life again, even if it's just borrowed." I looked at the keys, old, tarnished, attached to a leather fob that had cracked and worn with age. They looked ordinary. They looked like any keys you might find in a junk drawer or at the bottom of a forgotten box. But I could feel them. Even from several feet away, I could feel them pulling at something inside me. A hunger, a need, a desperate desire to be held and used and kept. "If I take them," I said slowly, "what happens to me?" Edward Marsh smiled. It was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. "You won't be alone anymore. That's something, isn't it? I'll be with you. Every drive, every errand, every late-night trip to nowhere. You'll have a passenger who never leaves, a companion who never abandons you." His smile flickered. "It's more than I ever had. And if I say no?" The sadness drained from his face. What replaced it was something older, colder, something that had spent 14 years learning how to want. "Then I'll wait. I'll park outside your house every night, watch you through your windows, follow you wherever you go. I'll be the thing you can't escape, the presence you can't explain, the shadow at the edge of your life." He lowered his hand, keys jingling softly. "You can't make me leave, Mr. Aldridge. This is my house, my street, my world now, and sooner or later, everyone who lives here gives me what I want." I thought about the house across town, the one where he'd died. 6 tenants in 10 years, none of them lasting more than a few months. I thought about what Detective Reeves had said, about the laptop broadcasting from inside a cube of crushed metal. I thought about a man who had loved his car more than anything, who had been erased so completely that even death couldn't give him peace. "I won't take your keys," I said. "But I won't leave either." Edward Marsh tilted his head, confused. "You want to be remembered? Fine. I'll remember you. I'll learn everything about you, where you worked, where you lived, what you loved. I'll visit your grave if you have one. I'll say your name out loud so the universe knows you existed." I took a breath. "But I won't let you hitch a ride in my body, Edward. That's not companionship. That's possession." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Edward Marsh laughed. It was a terrible sound, dusty and broken, like something that hadn't been used in years. "You're different," he said. "Most of them just run. Running doesn't seem to help." "No, it doesn't." He looked down at the keys in his hand, then back at me. "I'll hold you to your promise, Mr. Aldridge. Remember me. Say my name. Don't let me disappear again." He faded, not all at once, gradually, like fog burning off in morning sun. First, his edges went soft, then his features blurred, then there was nothing but cold air and the faint smell of exhaust. The bedroom was empty again, just an empty room with no furniture, no photograph, no trace of Edward Marsh except the cold that lingered in my bones. That was 3 months ago. The car still comes, every night, same time, same spot. But it doesn't feel threatening anymore. It feels like what it is, a man who lost everything, waiting for someone to acknowledge that he once existed. I've kept my promise. I found his grave, unmarked, in a potter's field on the edge of the county. I paid for a headstone. Nothing fancy, just his name and dates, and a small engraving of a car. Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit on my porch and watch the sedan across the street. I'll raise my coffee cup in a small salute. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I'll see a figure behind the wheel raise a hand in response. Edward Marsh isn't gone. I don't think he'll ever be gone, but he's not hunting anymore. He's just waiting, the way all lonely things wait, for someone to look at them and say, "I see you. I remember you. You were here." Some nights, when the rain is heavy and the streetlights blur into soft orange halos, I think I understand him. The need to be witnessed, the fear of being erased, the desperate hope that something of us survives after we're gone. I hope, when my time comes, someone remembers me too. Until then, I'll keep my promise. I'll remember Edward Marsh, and every night his car will be there, parked across the street, headlights dark, engine silent, waiting, watching, home at last. Story 4. The call center phone that rang from a disconnected number. There's a special kind of misery that comes with working the night shift at a call center. The fluorescent lights that never dim, the recycled air that tastes like old coffee and desperation, the endless parade of angry voices demanding things you can't give them. I'd been doing it for 2 years, long enough to stop caring about customer satisfaction scores, long enough to develop a permanent tension headache, long enough to forget what sunlight felt like on my skin. I was 26 and going nowhere, answering phones for a utility company that didn't care about me or the people I talked to. The only reason I'd taken the night shift was the pay differential, an extra $2 an hour to handle the calls that came in between midnight and 8 a.m. Mostly emergencies, people whose power had gone out, whose water had stopped running, whose lives had been interrupted by some failure of infrastructure they expected me to fix with a few keystrokes. I couldn't fix anything. I could only log tickets and transfer calls and apologize in a voice that had long since stopped sounding sincere. The call center was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, one of those glass towers that looked impressive from outside but felt like a prison from within. At night, with the city dark and rain streaking down the windows, it was easy to forget there was a world beyond these cubicles. Just me and a handful of other overnight workers, spread out across a floor designed for hundreds, islands of dim light in an ocean of empty desks. The phone at station 247 started ringing on a Tuesday in November. I noticed it because Station 247 had been empty for months. It was in the far corner of the floor, near the emergency exit and the supply closet, in a cluster of cubicles that management had never bothered to fill after the last round of layoffs. No one sat there. No one had any reason to be there. The computers were powered down, the chairs pushed neatly under the desks, everything covered in a fine layer of dust that housekeeping had stopped bothering to clean. But the phone was ringing. I heard it during a lull between calls when the floor was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC and the distant murmur of my co-workers' voices. A soft, insistent trill coming from somewhere I couldn't immediately identify. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from the dark corner, from the abandoned cluster, from a desk that shouldn't have had an active line. I ignored it at first. Not my problem. Probably a glitch in the phone system, some crossed wire that would sort itself out. I had my own calls to take, my own tickets to log, my own small slice of corporate hell to manage. But the ringing didn't stop. 5 minutes, 10, 15. The same steady rhythm, over and over, patient and relentless. My co-workers started noticing too. I saw heads turn, confused glances exchanged across the floor. Someone made a joke about ghosts. Someone else suggested we just unplug it. I was the one who finally got up to check. Not out of bravery or curiosity, but because the sound was driving me crazy and no one else seemed willing to do anything about it. The walk to Station 247 felt longer than it should have. The overhead lights were motion activated, clicking on as I passed and clicking off behind me, leaving darkness in my wake. By the time I reached the corner cluster, I was surrounded by shadows, the glow of my co-workers' monitors, a distant constellation on the far side of the floor. The phone was old, one of those beige multi-line models from the 90s, the kind with a row of buttons that lit up when calls were waiting. Only one button was lit now, line 1, blinking in steady red pulses, synchronized with the ringing. I picked up the receiver. "Thank you for calling Midwest Utilities. This is Rachel. How can I help you?" Silence. Not dead air. I could hear something on the other end. Breathing, maybe, or the whisper of static that sometimes came through on bad connections. But no voice, no response, nothing that identified who was calling or why. "Hello? Is someone there?" More silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a sound that might have been a word, a name. My name. Rachel. I slammed the phone down. My hands were shaking. I stood there in the dark corner, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Bad connection, audio artifact, my own name echoing back from some quirk of the phone system. There were explanations. There had to be explanations. I went back to my desk and tried to forget about it. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time I didn't get up. Just sat there, listening to that distant trill, watching the shadows in the corner where Station 247 waited. My co-worker Miguel walked past on his way to the break room, paused, looked toward the sound. "That thing still going?" "Yeah." "Weird." He shrugged and kept walking. "Probably just a system error. It will fix it in the morning." But IT didn't fix it. The phone kept ringing off and on for the rest of my shift. Every time I thought it had stopped, it would start again. 5 minutes of silence, then that steady trill, patient and insistent, like something that had all the time in the world. When my shift ended at 8 a.m., I stopped by the supervisor's office and reported the issue. She barely looked up from her computer. "Station 247, that line's been disconnected for months. No way it could be ringing." I heard it. We all heard it. She sighed, typed something into her system, frowned. According to the records, that extension was decommissioned in March. There's no active service, no routing, nothing. If you heard ringing, it was probably coming from somewhere else. I knew what I'd heard. I knew where it had come from. But I also knew there was no point in arguing. I went home, slept poorly, and came back the next night to find a note on my desk. No signature, no explanation. Just 6 words in handwriting I didn't recognize. "She's been waiting for your call." I showed the note to Miguel. He studied it for a moment, shrugged, and handed it back. "Probably just someone messing with you. People get bored on night shift. You know how it is." I knew how it was. I also knew that no one on our floor had handwriting like this, cramped and angular, the letters slanting backward like they were trying to retreat from the page. I'd seen everyone's handwriting on birthday cards and sign-up sheets and passive-aggressive notes about cleaning the microwave. This wasn't any of them. I threw the note away and tried to focus on work. The phone at station 247 didn't ring that night, or the next. By Friday, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a glitch after all. Some weird confluence of old wiring and bad weather. Nothing more. The note was harder to explain away, but I buried it under layers of rationalization. A prank, a mistake, something meant for someone else. Then Saturday came, and the phone started ringing again. Same time, a little after 2 a.m., during the quiet stretch when calls slowed to a trickle and the floor felt emptiest. Same steady trill, echoing from the dark corner where station 247 waited. I sat at my desk and listened to it ring, counting the cycles, waiting for it to stop. It didn't stop. After 30 rings, I got up. After 40, I was walking toward the corner, motion-activated lights clicking on around me like breadcrumbs marking my path. After 50, I was standing in front of station 247, staring down at the phone with its single blinking light. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Breathing, soft and rhythmic, close enough that I could hear the whistle of air through teeth. Then, that voice again, not quite a whisper, not quite a word, something in between that formed itself into syllables I almost recognized. "Rachel, why didn't you help me? Who is this? How do you know my name? You were supposed to help. That's your job. You help people." The voice was clearer now, female, young, with an edge of something that sounded like accusation, like disappointment, like grief. "I don't understand. Who are you?" Static crackled through the line. When the voice came back, it was different, harder, colder, the grief sharpening into something else. "You let me die." The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to silence, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. "You let me die." Those words repeated in my head, over and over, searching for a memory to attach themselves to. Had I talked to this person before? Had I failed someone in a way I didn't remember? I worked at a utility company. People called about power outages, billing disputes, service interruptions. Sometimes they were angry, sometimes they cried, but no one had ever died because I couldn't help them with their electric bill, at least no one I knew about. I went to my supervisor the next morning, before my shift ended. Told her about the calls, the voice, the accusation. She listened with the particular patience of someone who had heard too many complaints to take any of them seriously. "Rachel, that line is dead. There's no way anyone could be calling you from it." "Then explain how I keep hearing it ring. Explain how someone is talking to me when I pick up." She sighed. "I can have IT run a diagnostic, but I'm telling you, there's nothing there. That extension was disconnected when we downsized in March. The physical line was capped at the junction box. Can you check something else for me?" I hesitated, not sure how to phrase it. "Our call records. Is there any way to see if something happened to someone who called us? Like, if a customer died?" Her expression shifted, became careful. "Why would you ask that?" The voice on the phone. "She said I let her die. She said I was supposed to help her." My supervisor was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to her computer and started typing. "We had an incident," she said slowly. "Last March, right before the layoffs. A woman called in during a winter storm. Her power had gone out. She was elderly, lived alone. The call got routed to station 247, but there was a system error. It rang through, but the agent who was supposed to be there had already gone home. The call bounced around for almost an hour before it finally dropped. What happened to her? Hypothermia. They found her the next morning. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The family tried to sue, claimed we were negligent. Company settled out of court, sealed the records, and disconnected that extension. She paused. Her name was Margaret Hollis. Margaret Hollis. I turned the name over in my mind, searching for recognition. Found nothing. I never talked to her. I wasn't even working that night. No, you weren't. The agent who was supposed to take her call was a woman named Denise Stratton. My supervisor finally looked at me. Denise quit 3 weeks after the incident. Said she couldn't handle the guilt, even though it wasn't really her fault. She'd just clocked out early, didn't know there was a call waiting. Then why is she calling me? Why is she saying I let her die? I don't know, Rachel. I don't even know how any of this is possible. She closed the file on her screen. But I'll tell you the same thing I told Denise before she left. Whatever you're hearing, whatever you think is happening, it's not real. It can't be real. Dead people don't make phone calls. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night, when I came in for my shift, there was another note on my desk. Same handwriting. Same backward slanting letters. You sound just like her. That's why I picked you. Come to station 247 at 3:17 a.m. That's when I died. I want to talk to you properly this time. I looked at the clock. It was 2:45. I should have left. Should have clocked out, walked to my car, driven home and never come back. No job was worth this. Not the pay differential, not the health insurance, not any of the small practical reasons I'd used to justify 2 years of misery in this fluorescent purgatory. But I didn't leave. I sat at my desk and watched the minutes tick by, listening to the ambient hum of the building, feeling the weight of station 247 in the dark corner like a gravitational pull I couldn't escape. At 3:10, I started walking. The floor was emptier than usual. Miguel had called in sick, and 2 other agents had gone home early, citing a system outage that had slowed calls to almost nothing. Just me and a handful of others, scattered across the vast space like survivors of something we didn't yet understand. The motion-activated lights clicked on as I approached the corner. Station 247 emerged from the shadows. The dusty desk, the old computer, the beige phone with its row of unlit buttons. Everything silent, everything still. I sat down in the chair. It creaked beneath my weight, protesting the first use it had seen in months. The phone sat in front of me, ordinary and innocuous, giving no indication that it was anything other than a dead piece of equipment. 3:14, 3:15, 3:16. At exactly 3:17, the phone rang. I answered before the first ring finished. Margaret? Silence. Then breathing. Not the ragged, desperate breathing of someone dying, but something slower, calmer. The breath of someone who had been waiting a very long time and finally had what they wanted. You came. Her voice was clearer now, almost normal, like the connection had finally stabilized after months of static. I wasn't sure you would. I'm here. What do you want? I want you to understand. A pause. Do you know what it's like to die alone? To feel the cold creeping into your bones, knowing that no one is coming, that the phone rang and no one answered? I'm sorry that happened to you. I really am. But I wasn't there that night. I didn't. I know. Her voice softened. I know you weren't. But she was supposed to be. Denise. She was supposed to answer my call, and she left early because she was tired, because she didn't want to be there, because her life was more important than mine. I gripped the receiver tighter. Then why are you calling me? Why not her? Because I already did. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. What do you mean? I called her for 3 months, every night, the same time, the same words. I wanted her to feel what I felt, the fear, the desperation, the loneliness of knowing help isn't coming. I wanted her to understand. Margaret's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. She understood. In the end, she understood completely. My mouth went dry. What happened to Denise? She couldn't take it anymore. The calls, the guilt, the voice in her ear reminding her what she'd done. She drove her car into the river on a night just like this one. Raining, cold, alone. A sound that might have been a laugh. She finally knows what it feels like. I felt sick. I remembered my supervisor saying Denise had quit, but she hadn't said anything about what happened after. Hadn't mentioned a car and a river, a death that mirrored the one she'd inadvertently caused. You killed her. I reminded her, that's all. I reminded her every night until she couldn't forget anymore. And then she made her own choice. Margaret's voice hardened, just like she made a choice to leave early that night. Just like everyone makes choices that affect people they'll never meet. I haven't made any choice. I never talked to you, never ignored your call, never did anything. You sound like her. The words stopped me cold. That's what the note said. What does that mean? Your voice, the way you say thank you for calling, how can I help you? The tone, the rhythm, the little sigh you make before you answer. It's exactly the same as Denise. Margaret's breathing grew louder, closer, like she was pressing her mouth against the receiver. The first time I heard you answer a call, I thought she'd come back. Thought I'd get another chance to make her understand. But it was just you. A stranger who sounds like the woman who let me die. The lights around me flickered. Not the motion-activated ones. All of them. Every light on the floor, stuttering in unison like the building itself was responding to something. I don't want to hurt you, Rachel. I just want someone to hear me. To acknowledge what happened to me. To say the words that Denise never said. What words? That it mattered. That my death mattered. That I wasn't just a dropped call, a system error, a lawsuit to be settled and sealed and forgotten. Her voice cracked. I was 83 years old. I had grandchildren who never visited, neighbors who never checked on me. A life that had gotten so small I could have disappeared and no one would have noticed. And when I needed help, when I was freezing to death in my own home, the one person who could have saved me had already gone home because she was tired. Tears were streaming down my face. I didn't know when I'd started crying. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm so sorry. Say it mattered. Say my life mattered. Say you would have helped me if you'd been there. It mattered, I whispered. Your life mattered. If I had been there, I would have helped you. I would have stayed on the line until help arrived. I would have... The lights went out. All of them, everywhere, plunging the floor into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard something that didn't come from the phone. Footsteps, slow and shuffling, moving through the darkness somewhere behind me. And a voice, not from the receiver anymore, but from somewhere close, somewhere in the room, somewhere that a voice shouldn't be able to come from. Thank you, Rachel. That's all I needed to hear. A hand touched my shoulder, cold. So cold it burned through my shirt, through my skin, all the way down to the bone. Now let me show you what it felt like. The cold spread through me like water through fabric. It started at my shoulder, where her hand pressed against me and radiated outward, down my arm, across my chest, up into my neck. Within seconds, I couldn't feel my fingers. Within a minute, my teeth were chattering so hard I thought they might crack. And then, I was somewhere else. Not the call center. Not anywhere I recognized. I was sitting in a small living room, surrounded by furniture that looked decades old. A floral couch, a wooden television cabinet, framed photographs of people I didn't know. The lights were off, the windows were dark, and the cold was everywhere, seeping up from the floor, pressing in from the walls, turning my breath into pale clouds that hung in the air. I was in Margaret's house. I was living her final hours. The phone was beside me, an old rotary model, avocado green, sitting on an end table covered in doilies. I watched my hand, her hand, old and thin and trembling, reach for the receiver. Watched the fingers dial a number from memory, the wheel clicking as it rotated back after each digit. Ringing, once, twice, 10 times, 20. Thank you for calling Midwest Utilities. Please hold for the next available representative. Hold music. Tinny and distant, some generic melody designed to calm people who were already angry. I listened to it for what felt like hours, the cold deepening, my body growing number with each passing minute. Thank you for calling Midwest Utilities. Please hold. The line disconnected. I dialed again. Same number, same ringing, same hold music that stretched on and on while the temperature dropped and my lungs started to ache with every breath. Thank you for calling. Disconnected again. The third time, the phone didn't even ring, just dead air. The soft hiss of a line going nowhere, the silence of a system that had already given up on me. I tried to stand, tried to walk to the door, to get outside, to find a neighbor who might help. But my legs wouldn't work. The cold had sunk too deep, frozen the muscles, turned my body into a prison I couldn't escape. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the life drain out of me degree by degree. And I understood. This was what Margaret had felt. The fear, the helplessness, the desperate hope that someone would answer, giving way to the terrible certainty that no one was coming. She had died alone in this chair, phone still clutched in her frozen hand, waiting for a voice that never came. I came back to myself all at once. The call center floor was still dark, but I could see. Some emergency lighting had kicked on, casting everything in a dim red glow that made the shadows deeper and stranger. I was on the floor, I realized. Curled up beside Station 247, shivering so hard my muscles screamed. Margaret was standing over me. I could see her now, not clearly, not completely, but enough. An old woman in a housecoat, her skin gray-blue with cold, her eyes clouded with frost. She looked down at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Now you know," she said. "Now you understand what it's like to call for help and have no one answer." I tried to speak, but my jaw was locked, my teeth still chattering from cold that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled building. All I could manage was a weak moan. "I'm not going to kill you, Rachel." She crouched beside me, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could. I know how easy it is now, how simple it is to take the warmth out of someone, degree by degree, until there's nothing left. But that's not what I want. What? I forced the word out through frozen lips. What do you want? I told you. I want to be remembered. I want someone to know what happened to me, to carry my story, to make sure I'm not just a sealed file in a corporate archive. She reached out with one spectral hand and touched my cheek. The cold was agonizing. You felt what I felt. You'll never forget it now. Every time you answer a phone, every time someone calls for help, you'll think of me. I will, I promise. I know. She stood up, drifting slightly as she rose, her form flickering like a candle in a draft. But I need one more thing from you. Anything. There's a file in the supervisor's office, in the locked cabinet behind her desk. The settlement records from my case, my name, my address, the transcript of the calls I made that night. The company sealed them, hid them away, pretended I never existed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something there that might have been hope. I want you to unseal them. I want you to send them to my family. My granddaughter lives in Cedar Rapids. I'll give you the address. I want them to know what happened to me. The truth, not the sanitized version the lawyers created. I could lose my job. You could. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like someone's grandmother instead of something that had crawled out of the grave. But you won't die alone in a cold house with no one to hear you. That's worth something, isn't it? I thought about Denise Stratton driving her car into a river because she couldn't escape the voice on the phone. I thought about how easily that could be me, how close I'd come to understanding exactly why she'd made that choice. I'll do it, I said. I'll find the file. I'll send it to your family. Margaret nodded. The cold around me began to ease, warmth seeping back into my limbs like blood returning to sleeping flesh. Thank you, Rachel. She was fading now, her outline growing dimmer, her voice becoming a whisper. The phone won't ring anymore, I promise. You've given me what I needed. She was almost gone, just a suggestion of shape, a hint of cold in the air, when she spoke one last time. But if you break your promise, if you forget me, I'll call again. And next time, I won't let you warm up. The lights came back on. I was alone on the floor of the call center, surrounded by empty cubicles and the hum of machines, shivering in a pool of something that might have been melted frost. The phone at station 247 was silent, but in my pocket, my cell phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. An address in Cedar Rapids, and a name. Sarah Hollis. Tell her Grammy loved her. I broke into my supervisor's office that same night. Broke into is generous. The lock on the filing cabinet was cheap, the kind you could open with a paperclip and some patience. I found the file exactly where Margaret had said it would be, in a manila folder marked Hollis, M, Settlement, Confidential, Do Not Distribute. Inside were copies of the legal documents, the call logs, the coroner's report. Everything the company had hidden away to protect itself from liability. And at the bottom of the stack, a transcript. Margaret's final calls, time-stamped to the minute. I read them there in the dark office, hands still trembling from cold that had faded, but not quite disappeared. 3:02 a.m. Incoming call, Station 247. Caller identified as Margaret Hollis. Hold time, 47 seconds. Connected to representative, 3:03 a.m. Call transferred to hold queue. Representative logged off system. 3:03 a.m. Hold music initiated. 3:17 a.m. Call disconnected. No representative available. 14 minutes. She'd been on hold for 14 minutes while her house grew colder and her body began to shut down. 14 minutes of tinny music and automated messages, waiting for a human voice that never came. I photocopied everything, sealed the originals back in the folder, replaced it in the cabinet, and walked out of the building with the copies tucked inside my jacket. The sun was coming up by then, gray light filtering through the rain clouds that seemed to follow me everywhere lately. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to mail the package. I wrote a letter to Sarah Hollis explaining who I was and why I was sending this. I didn't mention the phone calls, the cold, the ghost of her grandmother standing over me in the dark. Just said I'd discovered the documents and thought the family deserved to know the truth. I included my contact information in case she wanted to reach out. She called a week later. I always knew there was more to it. Her voice was thick with emotion, the kind of grief that never fully heals. The company told us it was an accident, that no one was at fault, that Grammy had just waited too long to call. But I knew that wasn't right. She called me that same night, before she called the utility company, said her power had gone out and she was going to get help. I'm sorry, I said. It felt inadequate. Everything felt inadequate. She trusted them to help her. That was the worst part. She wasn't angry when she called me. She was so sure someone would answer. Sarah was crying now, soft sobs that crackled through the phone line. She died believing help was coming. I thought about Margaret's ghost, about the cold certainty in her voice when she talked about Denise Stratton. about the accusation that had brought me to Station 247 in the first place. She knows, I said quietly. She knows what happened now. She knows you loved her. Silence on the line. Then, how do you know that? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Just told Sarah I was sorry again, that I hoped the documents brought her some closure, that her grandmother had mattered to someone even if the company wanted to pretend otherwise. When I hung up, the air around me felt warmer than it had in weeks. I quit my job the next day, didn't give 2 weeks' notice, didn't explain to my supervisor why I was leaving, didn't do any of the professional courtesies that might have protected my references. I just walked out and never went back. The call center closed 6 months later. Budget cuts, they said. Operations consolidated to a facility in another state. But I heard rumors from people who'd stayed, stories about phones ringing in empty cubicles, about cold spots that appeared without explanation, about voices in the break room when no one was there. Margaret had kept her promise. She didn't call me again. But I don't think she was the only one haunting that building. I work from home now. Customer service for an online retailer, answering emails instead of phones. It's quieter, lonelier, but I don't mind the loneliness anymore. I understand it better than I used to. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Margaret Hollis, about an old woman sitting alone in the dark, listening to hold music while her life slipped away. About all the people who call for help and don't get it, not because there's no one available, but because the person who should answer has already gone home. I think about Denise Stratton, too, about how easy it would have been to become her, to let the guilt and the cold and the voice in the darkness drive me to the same ending. I came close, closer than I like to admit, but I made a different choice. Kept my promise. Gave Margaret what she needed and walked away whole. At least, mostly whole. There are nights when I wake up shivering, convinced the temperature has dropped to freezing even though the thermostat reads 72. Nights when I hear a phone ringing somewhere in my apartment, faint and insistent, even though I don't own a landline. Nights when I lie in bed listening to rain on the windows and wonder if someone is trying to reach me from somewhere far away. I always check, always get up and look, just in case. But the sound is never there when I go looking. Just silence and darkness, and the lingering feeling that someone is waiting on the other end of a line I can't find. Margaret is gone. I believe that. She got what she wanted, and she moved on. But sometimes I wonder about all the others, all the people who called for help and never got an answer, all the voices that might still be out there, waiting in disconnected numbers and abandoned extensions, hoping someone will finally pick up. I don't answer phones anymore, not because I'm afraid of what might be on the other end, but because I know what it sounds like when someone dies waiting for you to care. And that's a sound you never forget, no matter how hard you try. Story 5. The person who stared at me through my TV's reflection. I noticed her for the first time on a night when the power went out. The storm had been building all evening. Thunder rolling in from the west, rain hammering against the windows in waves that made the old house groan. I'd been watching something on television, some documentary I wasn't really paying attention to, when the screen went black and the lights died, and I was suddenly sitting in complete darkness. That's when I saw her. The TV screen, even powered off, still held a faint reflection of the room behind me. I could see the couch I was sitting on, the lamp in the corner, the doorway leading to the kitchen. All of it reversed, darkened, like looking through a window into a shadowed version of my living room. And standing in that doorway, in the reflection, was a woman who wasn't there when I turned around. I spun so fast, I knocked my beer off the coffee table. The doorway was empty, just the dark rectangle leading to my darker kitchen, nothing moving, nothing out of place. But when I turned back to the TV, she was still there, still standing in the reflected doorway, still watching me. I couldn't make out details. She was just a shape, a silhouette, the suggestion of a figure where no figure should be. but I could feel her attention, could feel her eyes on the back of my head, even though she only existed in the glass. Then the power came back on, the TV flared to life, and she was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, some combination of darkness and storm, and the particular way my eyes adjusted to the sudden blackness. The mind sees patterns where there are none. I'd read about that somewhere. Pareidolia, it's called. The brain's tendency to find faces in random shapes, figures in shadows, meaning in meaninglessness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been real. That somewhere in the space between the reflection and reality, someone had been standing behind me, watching. I'm 31 years old, and I inherited this house from my aunt 6 months ago. She'd lived here alone for almost 40 years, never married, no children, the kind of quiet life that accumulates possessions, but not people. When she died, peacefully, in her sleep, the way everyone hopes to go, she left everything to me because I was the only family member who'd bothered to visit her more than once a decade. The house is old, built in the 1920s, updated piecemeal over the years, full of the kind of quirks and character that real estate agents call charming and homeowners call expensive to fix. I'd been meaning to renovate, to strip away the wallpaper and replace the fixtures and make it mine. But something about the place resisted change. Every time I started planning updates, I'd find myself putting it off, finding excuses, leaving things exactly as my aunt had arranged them, including the television. It was an old flat screen, not particularly large, mounted on the wall across from the couch. My aunt hadn't watched much TV. She preferred books, puzzles, the radio programs she'd grown up with, but she'd bought this one a few years before she died. In case of emergencies, she'd told me, in case I need to see the news. I'd thought about replacing it with something newer, something that didn't look so dated. But like everything else in the house, it stayed. I watched it every night, falling asleep to late-night shows and infomercials, letting the blue glow fill the darkness until exhaustion finally pulled me under. After the night of the storm, I started paying attention to the reflection. Not consciously, at first, just glancing at the black screen when I turned off a show, checking the dark glass when I passed by during the day. Looking for her. Looking for any sign that what I'd seen had been real. For 2 weeks, nothing. Just my own reflection, my furniture, my empty rooms reversed in the screen. I started to relax, started to believe my own explanations about tricks of light and pattern-seeking brains. Then I saw her again. I'd turned off the TV around midnight, ready for bed, and paused to check my phone before getting up. The screen was dark, reflecting the lamp behind me and the doorway and the window with rain streaming down the glass. She was standing by the window, not in the doorway this time, closer, maybe 10 feet behind where I sat. I could see more detail now. Long dark hair, a pale face, a dress that looked old-fashioned, the kind of thing my aunt might have worn decades ago. She wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything except standing there, hands at her sides, face turned toward me. Watching. I didn't turn around this time. Didn't spin to look. Didn't verify what I already knew, that the space behind me was empty, that she existed only in the reflection, that turning would just make her vanish and leave me doubting my sanity all over again. Instead, I watched her watch me. For almost 5 minutes, neither of us moved. I sat frozen on my couch, staring at the dark screen, studying the shape that stood sentinel behind me. She never blinked, never shifted her weight, never gave any indication that she was anything other than a statue carved from shadow and glass. Then, slowly, she raised one hand, not waving, not reaching for me, just lifting her arm until her finger pointed at something to my left, something outside my field of vision in the reflection. I looked. On the wall beside the TV, almost invisible in the darkness, was a photograph I'd never noticed before. A small frame, dusty with age, containing a black and white image of a woman I didn't recognize. She was young in the photo, dark hair, pale face, old-fashioned dress. The same woman standing behind me in the reflection. When I turned back to the TV, she was gone. But now I knew she wasn't a trick of the light. She was something that had been here long before me, and she wanted me to know who she was. I took the photograph down the next morning. In the daylight, with rain still pattering against the windows and the house feeling almost normal, I could examine it properly. The frame was tarnished, the glass clouded with decades of dust, but the image underneath was still clear. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, standing in front of a house I recognized. This house, my aunt's house, my house now. She was posed formally, the way people did in old photographs, but there was something in her expression that didn't match the stiffness of her posture. A sadness in her eyes, a tension around her mouth. She looked like someone trying very hard to appear happy and not quite succeeding. On the back of the photograph, in faded pencil, Vera, 1952. I didn't know anyone named Vera. My aunt had never mentioned her, and I couldn't find the name in any of the family records I'd inherited along with the house. I searched through boxes of old documents, photo albums, the correspondence my aunt had kept in a trunk in the attic. Nothing. Vera didn't appear anywhere, but she'd lived in this house. The photograph proved that. And somehow, 70 years later, she was still here, trapped in reflections, watching whoever occupied her home. I started researching the house's history. The county records office had property documents going back to the original construction in 1923. The house had changed hands several times over the decades, passing through families I'd never heard of before landing with my aunt in 1984. I traced the ownership backward, name by name, looking for Vera. I found her in the records from 1951. Vera Ashworth, age 24, had purchased the house with her husband Martin that year. They'd lived there together for less than 2 years before Martin Ashworth died in an industrial accident, crushed by machinery at the factory where he worked, according to the newspaper obituary I found in the archives. Vera had stayed in the house after his death, alone in a home built for two, with no family nearby and a community that didn't know what to do with young widows. The records showed her paying property taxes through 1958, then nothing. No sale of the house, no transfer of ownership, no death certificate or obituary or any indication of what had happened to her. The property records simply jumped from Vera Ashworth in 1958 to a new owner, Harold and Martha Benson, in 1959, as if Vera had never existed, as if she'd just vanished from the house and the world in the space between one tax year and the next. I went to the local historical society, hoping someone might know more. The woman behind the desk was in her 80s, old enough to remember the town as it had been half a century ago. Vera Ashworth? She frowned when I mentioned the name. That's not a name I've heard in a long time. You knew her? Knew of her. I was just a girl when it happened, but people talked. She lowered her voice, even though we were alone in the building. She disappeared, you know. One winter, just gone. House was empty, car still in the driveway, everything she owned still inside. Police searched for weeks, but never found her. What did people think happened? The old woman's face darkened. Some thought she'd run off, started a new life somewhere, couldn't stand the memories in that house. But others, she hesitated. Others said she never left at all, that she'd done something to herself, and her body was still there somewhere, hidden in a place no one thought to look. I thought about the woman in my TV screen, the sadness in her eyes, the way she'd pointed to her own photograph, desperate to be recognized after all these years. The house was searched, top to bottom apparently. Police, neighbors, even some volunteers from the church. They never found anything. She looked at me with sudden curiosity. Why are you asking about her? Are you the one who bought the old Ashworth place? I inherited it from my aunt, your aunt. The woman nodded slowly. Eleanor Vance. She came to see me once, years ago, asked the same questions you're asking now. Her eyes met mine. She said she'd seen something in that house, something that scared her. I told her the same thing I'm telling you. Vera Ashworth has been gone for 65 years. Whatever's in that house, it's just an old building holding on to old memories. But I could see in her face that she didn't believe that. And neither did I. That night, I sat in my living room with the TV off, watching the black screen, waiting. She appeared around 11, not in the doorway this time, not by the window, standing directly behind the couch, close enough that if she'd been real, I could have felt her breath on my neck. "Vera," I said out loud, "I know who you are now." In the reflection, she tilted her head. A small movement, almost human, almost normal, like she was listening. "I know you lived here. I know you disappeared." I swallowed hard. "I want to help you. If there's something you need me to find, something you need me to do." She raised her hand again, pointing just like before. But this time, she wasn't pointing at a photograph. She was pointing at the floor, at the old hardwood beneath the couch, the boards that creaked when I walked on them, the foundation that had been laid almost 100 years ago. She was pointing down, and in the reflection, I saw her mouth move, forming a single word I couldn't hear but could read clearly on her pale, ghostly lips. Basement. I'd been in the basement exactly twice since inheriting the house. The first time was during the initial walkthrough with the estate lawyer, a cursory glance at a space cluttered with decades of accumulated storage. The second was to check the water heater when the hot water stopped working. Both times, I'd stayed near the stairs, unwilling to venture deeper into the maze of boxes and forgotten furniture that filled the underground space. There was something about that basement I didn't like, something beyond the usual discomfort of dark, enclosed spaces. A heaviness in the air, a weight that pressed against my chest every time I descended those creaking wooden steps. Now I understood why. I waited until morning to go down. Told myself it was practical, better lighting, clearer head, more time to deal with whatever I might find. But really, I was afraid. Afraid of what Vera was trying to show me. Afraid of what had been waiting beneath my feet all these months. The basement stairs groaned under my weight, each step announcing my descent into the darkness below. I'd brought a flashlight, but the single bulb hanging from the ceiling still worked, casting a sickly yellow glow over the chaos of storage. My aunt had been a keeper of things. Boxes stacked on boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, tools and decorations and possessions from every decade of her long life. It would take weeks to sort through it all properly, but I wasn't here to sort. I was here to find whatever Vera wanted me to find. I started in the corner beneath the living room, roughly where she'd been pointing. The concrete floor was cracked and uneven, patched in places where water damage had required repair. I moved boxes aside, shifted old chairs and a broken table, cleared a path to the foundation wall. Nothing, just concrete and dust and the musty smell of a space that had been closed off from fresh air for too long. I expanded my search, worked my way along the walls, checking for anything unusual, loose stones, hidden compartments, signs that the floor had been disturbed at some point. The basement was larger than I'd realized, extending beyond the footprint of the house into spaces that must have been added later, carved out of the earth to create more storage. It was in one of these extensions that I found the wall, not concrete like the rest of the foundation, but brick. Old brick, the kind they'd used in the 20s and 30s, laid in uneven rows that suggested amateur construction. The wall blocked off a corner of the basement, creating a sealed space maybe 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep. I'd never noticed it before. Had never had reason to look this far into the basement's depths. But standing in front of it now, flashlight beam playing across the aged mortar, I felt a certainty settle into my bones. This was what she wanted me to find. I went upstairs and got a hammer. The mortar was old, crumbling, easier to break through than I'd expected. The first brick came loose after a few solid hits, revealing darkness beyond. A smell wafted out, not decay, not after 65 years, but something dusty and closed off. The air of a space that had been sealed since before I was born. I kept working, brick by brick, widening the hole, creating an opening large enough to shine my flashlight through and see what waited on the other side. It was a small room, more of a closet, really. Just enough space for what it contained. A chair, wooden, simple, positioned in the center of the earthen floor, and in the chair, still sitting upright after all these years, was what remained of Vera Ashworth. She was bones now, mostly, a skeleton in a faded dress, hands resting on the armrests, head tilted forward as if she'd simply fallen asleep and never woken up. But there were details that told a different story. Ropes around her wrists and ankles, rotted but still visible. A gag in her mouth, the fabric disintegrated, but the knot still tied behind her skull. She hadn't died peacefully. She'd been tied to that chair, sealed behind that wall, and left to die in the darkness beneath her own home. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat, hit a stack of boxes and went down hard, flashlight spinning away across the concrete floor. In the sudden darkness, I heard something, a sound like breathing, like someone exhaling very slowly right beside my ear. I scrambled for the flashlight, found it, pointed it wildly around the basement, searching for whatever had made that sound. Nothing. Just shadows and dust and the hole in the wall where Vera's remains waited. But when I looked at the old television in the corner, one of those ancient cathode ray models my aunt had stored down here, its curved screen dark and dusty, I saw her. Vera, standing in the reflection, clearer than I'd ever seen her. I could make out her features now, the sadness in her eyes replaced by something else. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. Her lips moved again, forming words I couldn't hear but could read. Find him. Find what he wrote. Then she was gone, and I was alone in the basement with her bones and a mystery that had been buried for 65 years. I called the police, told them I'd found human remains in my basement, watched their skepticism turn to shock as they saw what I'd uncovered. They took my statement, secured the scene, brought in forensic specialists who confirmed what I already knew. The bones belonged to a woman who had died decades ago, likely from dehydration and starvation based on the position of the body and the circumstances of her imprisonment. Vera Ashworth hadn't run away. She'd been murdered, slowly and deliberately, by someone who had bricked her into her own basement and let her die screaming into a gag that no one could hear through. The investigation turned up old records, old names, old suspects. Martin Ashworth had died in 1953, but he'd had a brother, Thomas Ashworth, who had lived in town until 1960 before moving west and disappearing from local records. The police theorized that Thomas had killed Vera for the house, for money, for reasons that had died with him decades ago. But I knew there was more. Vera had told me to find what he wrote. Something was still hidden in this house, some evidence that would explain not just how she died, but why. And until I found it, I knew she wouldn't rest. That night, I sat in my living room with every light on, watching my reflection in the dark TV screen, waiting for her to appear again. She didn't. But when I finally fell asleep on the couch, I dreamed of a woman tied to a chair in darkness, listening to footsteps overhead, waiting for someone to find her, waiting for 65 years and counting. I tore the house apart looking for what Thomas had written. Started in the obvious places, my aunt's files, the boxes in the attic, the documents she'd kept in her roll-top desk. Found nothing connected to Thomas Ashworth, nothing that mentioned Vera's disappearance, nothing that suggested my aunt had known what was buried beneath her home. But she must have known something. The Historical Society woman had said my aunt asked about Vera, said she'd seen something in the house that scared her. For 40 years, Eleanor Vance had lived above Vera's grave, and I couldn't believe she'd been completely unaware. I searched her bedroom next, went through drawers and closets, checked behind furniture and under the bed, looked in all the places someone might hide something they didn't want found. It was in the closet that I discovered the loose floorboard, a single plank that shifted when I stepped on it, different from all the others. Underneath was a metal box, rusted at the edges, locked with a combination I didn't know. I broke it open with a screwdriver and found what my aunt had hidden away. Letters. A dozen of them, yellowed with age, addressed to Eleanor Vance from someone named Thomas Ashworth, postmarked from various cities across the country, spanning from 1984 to 1991, the year my aunt bought the house to 7 years later. I read them in order, sitting on my aunt's bedroom floor while rain streaked down the windows and the house settled around me. The first letter was brief, an introduction, a connection. Thomas had learned that Eleanor bought his family's old house, wanted to know if she was happy there, hoped she was taking good care of the place. Normal enough, if slightly strange. The second letter was longer. Thomas mentioned his brother Martin, who had died young. Mentioned Martin's wife Vera, who had gone away after Martin's death. He expressed sadness that the house had passed out of the family, but said he was glad it had found a good owner. The third letter was where things changed. Thomas wrote about guilt, about a weight he'd been carrying for decades, a secret that had followed him across the country as he ran from the place where it had happened. He didn't say what the secret was, not yet, but the desperation in his words was unmistakable. He was a man being crushed by something he couldn't escape. The letters continued, each one more tortured than the last. Thomas wrote about nightmares, about seeing Vera's face every time he closed his eyes, about hearing her voice calling to him from somewhere he couldn't reach. He wrote about wanting to confess, wanting to unburden himself, wanting to tell someone what he'd done before the guilt killed him. And then, in the 8th letter, he told her everything. He'd loved Vera. That was the beginning of it. A love that had started before his brother married her. A love he'd kept hidden because Martin had seen her first. He'd watched them build a life together in that house, watched them plan for children and futures that Thomas wanted for himself. And when Martin died in the factory accident, Thomas had seen his chance. He'd proposed to Vera 3 months after his brother's funeral. She'd refused, said she didn't love him, could never love him, would rather live alone in that house forever than become his wife. So he'd made sure she would. The letter described it in terrible detail, how he'd waited until a winter night when the snow was falling and no one would notice his car in the driveway, how he'd let himself in with the spare key Martin had given him years ago, how he'd found Vera in the living room, tied her to a chair before she could scream, carried her down to the basement while she struggled and begged, how he'd built the wall brick by brick, sealing her in while she watched, how he'd left her there, alive, knowing she would die slowly in the darkness beneath the house she'd loved more than him. I thought I would feel better, he wrote. I thought the jealousy would go away once she was gone. But it never did. It just turned into something worse. And now she's all I see, all I hear, all I think about. She's in every reflection, every shadow, every dark corner of every room I've ever slept in. I think she's been following me all these years. I think she'll follow me until I die. The final letter was dated November 1991. Thomas wrote that he was sick. Cancer, the doctors said. Only a few months left. He wanted my aunt to know the truth before he died. Wanted someone to find Vera, to give her a proper burial, to end the haunting that had consumed his life. She deserves to be found, he wrote. She deserves to rest. And maybe if someone finds her, she'll finally stop looking at me from the other side of every mirror. Maybe then I can die in peace. But my aunt hadn't found her, hadn't gone to the basement, hadn't broken through the wall, hadn't given Vera the rest she deserved. She'd hidden the letters under her floorboard, and lived with the knowledge for another 30 years. I understood why. The fear of what she might find, the horror of knowing what was beneath her feet every night, the easier path of pretending, of sealing away the truth, just like Thomas had sealed away Vera. But I wasn't going to make the same choice. I gathered the letters and called the detective who'd handled the initial investigation, told him I'd found a confession, told him who had killed Vera Ashworth and why. He came to the house that night, read the letters with an expression that shifted from skepticism to horror, and promised to update the official record. Thomas Ashworth died in 1992, he told me. Months after that last letter was written. There's no one left to prosecute, but at least her family will know what happened, if there's any family left to tell. After he left, I sat in my living room with the lights off, watching the TV screen, waiting for Vera to appear. She did, around midnight, standing closer than ever before, just behind the couch, her face finally clear in the reflection. Young and sad and tired, a woman who had spent 65 years waiting for someone to learn the truth. "I found what he wrote," I said. "I know what happened. I know who did this to you." She nodded, a small movement, barely perceptible, but enough. "Is there anything else? Anything else you need?" She raised her hand one more time, but she wasn't pointing at something in the house. She was pointing at herself, at her heart, and I understood. The funeral was small. I'd tracked down Vera's remaining family, a great-niece in Oregon who barely knew her ancestor's name, a cousin twice removed who'd heard rumors about the woman who'd disappeared. They came to the service more out of curiosity than grief, strangers paying respects to a ghost. But I was there, and I meant it. I'd chosen the cemetery myself, a quiet place on a hill overlooking the town, near a grove of trees that would shade her grave in summer and shelter it from snow in winter. The headstone was simple: Vera Ashworth, 1927 to 1958, finally home. It rained during the burial. Of course it did. The kind of soft, steady rain that seems less like weather and more like mourning, the sky itself paying tribute to someone who'd waited so long to be laid to rest. I spoke a few words, nothing fancy, nothing prepared, just the truth about what had happened to her, about the injustice she'd suffered, about the decades she'd spent trying to tell someone her story. The great-niece cried. The cousin looked uncomfortable. But I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for Vera. Afterward, I drove back to the house, my house now, though it had been hers first. I'd thought about selling it after everything that happened, moving somewhere without history, without ghosts, without the weight of what I'd discovered pressing down on every room. But I didn't. Vera had loved this house, had chosen to stay here after her husband died, had fought to keep it even when Thomas offered her another option. Whatever he'd done to her, whatever cruelty he'd inflicted in that basement, he hadn't taken that from her. The house was still hers in some way I couldn't quite explain, and now it was mine. A inheritance within an inheritance, passed down through violence and time until it reached someone willing to learn the truth. That night, I sat in my living room with the TV off and watched the dark screen for the last time. Vera didn't appear. I waited for hours, watching shadows shift across the glass, listening to rain tap against the windows, expecting at any moment to see her silhouette form in the reflection. But the screen stayed empty. Just my living room, my furniture, my own face staring back at me. She was gone. I should have felt relieved, should have been glad that the haunting was over, that I could finally live in this house without feeling watched. And part of me was glad, the part that had spent weeks jumping at reflections, afraid to turn off lights, unable to look at a dark screen without searching for shapes that shouldn't be there. But another part of me felt something different, something closer to loss. Vera had been alone for 65 years, trapped between walls, then trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to see her, And for a few weeks, I had been that someone. I'd seen her, learned her story, given her the recognition she'd been denied since the night Thomas sealed her away. Now she was at rest, and I was alone in a house full of rooms that felt emptier than before. I kept the photograph, the one she'd pointed to that first night, the black and white image of a young woman standing in front of this house with sadness in her eyes. I hung it in the living room, where I could see it every day, where anyone who visited would ask about it, and I could tell them her name. Vera Ashworth. She lived here. She mattered. That's what she'd wanted, I think. Not vengeance, not punishment for the man who'd killed her. Thomas had suffered enough in his own way, haunted by guilt until cancer finally released him. She just wanted to be remembered, to exist in someone's mind as more than a mystery, a rumor, a woman who'd simply vanished. I gave her that, and in return, she gave me something too. The knowledge that some stories need to be finished, that some truths need to be spoken no matter how long they've been buried, that the dead don't always want to hurt us. Sometimes they just want us to see them. I still check reflections sometimes, still glance at dark TV screens and window glass and mirrors in rooms I'm passing through. Old habits, born from weeks of watching and being watched. But I'm not looking for Vera anymore. I'm looking for the others, the ones who might still be waiting, trapped in glass and shadow, hoping someone will finally notice them. Because if Vera taught me anything, it's that the space between the reflection and reality isn't empty. It's full of people who never got to tell their stories. And maybe, if I pay attention, I can help them too. One reflection at a time.